Everybody knows everybody on the street and everybody chats with everybody. All the kids play out together. It's got a proper community vibe.
It's very close to the South Common, which is the major green area in the south of Lincoln.
You know, there's a lovely park there where people go and walk their dogs and can go and sit. So you have got the nice, idyllic, peaceful park only a short distance away.
But the peace is shattered on one summer's day. At 12:20 p.m, police are called to an address in Sincil Bank.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten. She had appeared to have been beaten with a blunt object.
The crime scene is secured.
The police came, they cornered off the streets, you weren't allowed anywhere near your houses and stuff. No one really told us what happened.
A murder investigation is immediately launched, and it's not long before the body is identified as 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang. But who is Mingzi, and how had she become a victim of such a brutal murder?
Mingzi Yang was originally from China. She came to the UK in 2008 and she was studying English at Lincoln College. Initially, she lived in the Humberside area, and in 2012, she moved to the address in Sincil Bank, where she lived with her partner, who she'd met fairly recently, Darren Grundy, and her young 5-year-old son.
Mingzi's son was from a previous relationship, but Darren quickly became part of the family.
As a couple, they were engaged to be married and were due to get married the following year.
But on the 17th of June, Darren had grown increasingly worried throughout the day when Mingzi failed to answer her phone.
He'd gone to work and he'd been trying to get hold of her throughout the day and without any success. So he left work early and made his way to the address.
Darren arrives home and makes a shocking discovery.
He found a scene of devastation, really. It looked like it had been ransacked. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary. There was a lot of blood in the address, and he discovered Mingzi's body.
And then he raised the alarm and the police were contacted.
As the police begin their investigation, they need to establish what Mingzi's last known movements were on the day of her murder.
Detectives will use a phrase sometimes that says if you find out how a person lived, then you'll find out how they died. It's about building up a detailed picture of that victim, because somewhere in there might just be the answer as to why this has happened and who's committed it. On the morning of the 17th of June, she'd gone and took her young son to the local primary school, which was a very short walk away, and returned to the address.
The killing was believed to have taken place in broad daylight, early in the morning after school, although the body wasn't discovered until Mr. Grundy raised the alarm.
The question is, who could possibly have wanted to harm Mingzi?
First thing that would go through my head is to try and establish exactly what has gone on.
The initial mystery for the police was that the house had been ransacked. There had been a burglary, and that possibly an intruder had killed Mingzi Yang.
News that a possible burglary has turned into a murder sends shockwaves across the local community.
There was fear and a sense of shock, because it's not something that happens with frequency in Lincoln at all. And the big fear is that our community is then under threat.
I remember hearing about it. My mum and my dad told me about it, and it was very upsetting. It's very traumatic knowing that it's basically on your front door. You know, you could go to sleep at night and something bad could happen. This could have been my mum, or this could have been my sister, or this could have been a relative that lives across the road.
Everybody was massively scared of what had happened because it was so close to home. It's 2 minutes away from the pub that I run. So that day, customers were coming in absolutely shocked and stunned with all the police cordons. It just is unheard of around here. You just can't believe that it's happened.
There was a genuine fear from people who lived in the local area that a burglar or intruder was at large and had carried out such a devastating crime in broad daylight. Neighbours were obviously concerned that this could possibly happen to them.
In the Lincoln suburb of Sincil-Bank, the community is shocked to hear of the murder of 29-year-old mum, Mingzi Yang, who has been beaten to death in her own home in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
She was a local student, she'd got a child. We just couldn't believe that somebody like her had been killed.
And the fear on the streets is growing.
A lot of people are scared of living around here, knowing that something really bad's happened, and it's on your front door.
The first feeling is one of shock, and then wanting to know really what had happened, was the public at risk.
When something like this happens in the community, there's a massive impact. There's lots of children and families in this area, so to have something so tragic and awful happening on your doorstep, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
That's all we were talking about. Everybody was just in utter disbelief that something like that could happen so close to home.
And a lot of them will have been friendly with Mingzi Yang in any event, so apart from the personal impact, you really do get a build-up of tension throughout the community. People feel understandably frightened. Who's committed it? Why have they committed it? Are they going to come back and do it again? If it is a burglary, is our house going to be the next target?
With such a brutal murder happening on a busy street, police are taken aback at the boldness of the crime.
Mingzi had a young son who had been dropped off at school, and the killing was believed to have taken place sometime between about 9 and 10 a.m.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, in a place like this, which appears quite peaceful and tranquil, is actually quite shocking.
The idea that an intruder had managed to get into this house unnoticed and carry out this killing was obviously very frightening for local people.
With the attack suspected to have occurred early in the day, police reach out to the locals for any potential information that may lead them to Mingzi's attacker.
You're really looking for witnesses. Something that's happened like that with so many injuries and so much devastation within the house would presumably have made some noise. You know, had she been screaming and shouting for help? Have the neighbours heard or seen anything? In a case like this, in an area like this, the community are absolutely vital. They are the eyes and ears, and they're going to know things and see things that the police will never get to find out about. So it's really important to get out in amongst the community and make yourself visible and ask those important questions, because just by being here, you may be approached by a member of the public who tells you something that in isolation might seem quite minor, but actually, when you put it together as part of a jigsaw puzzle, it could actually help to solve the case.
Local reporter Richard Van Plu is also on the scene.
The first time I became aware of Mingzi's death was when the police put out a press release saying that the body of a woman had been found. Killings like this, obviously in rural areas, don't happen every day, and people are quite rightly shocked. And sometimes when you arrive at the scene, people will talk to you. It's their way of dealing with what's happened.
But so far, door-to-door inquiries have uncovered no leads to Mingzi's attacker. With the fear in the area growing, forensics arrived to examine the scene.
When I arrived at the scene, it was a shocking sight. Mingzi was face upwards and she was covered in blood. She was in the main living room. There was large, pooled, smeared blood staining on the carpet all around Mingzi's body. There was a white radiator near where Mingzi's body was found, and there was spots of blood spattered onto the white radiator. The smears and pools of blood along the carpet had indicated to me that she'd been assaulted at one end of the room, and she was on the floor crawling towards the kitchen in an attempt to escape. The blood spatters on the radiator and on the adjacent wall indicated that as she was crawling along, she was being hit with a blunt instrument repeatedly.
Post-mortem results then arrive, which further adds to the horrific nature of Mingzi's death.
A post-mortem found Mingzi's injuries were quite severe.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head. She also had, interestingly enough, some defence wounds, including a fracture to one of her hands, which clearly indicated that she'd been trying to fend the attacker off. But the actual number of injuries and the nature of those injuries were very, very severe and would only ever have resulted in one thing, which was her death. She'd basically been battered to death.
But as police scour the scene and surrounding areas, there is no sign of the murder weapon.
The weapon used was believed to be a very hard, heavy, blunt object. But interestingly enough, it wasn't recovered from the scene, which suggests that potentially the offender may have possibly brought it with them, but certainly taken it away with them, which does suggest a degree of premeditation and planning and the realisation, even in the moment of everything happening, that actually they might have left some evidence on that weapon.
Police start to suspect that their initial theory, that Mingzi disturbed a burglar who then attacked her, could be wrong. This is reinforced when detectives examine Mingzi's possessions.
Burglary is normally where somebody goes in and steals something. Sounds fairly obvious, but that's what happens. So if there were items in that house, such as TVs, electrical goods, jewellery, cash, you would expect someone that's committing a burglary to take those. The fact that items didn't appear to be missing is really important.
And new forensic evidence casts further doubt that Mingzi disturbed a burglary taking place.
The perpetrator had gone upstairs and opened a number of drawers, which made it look like a burglary. However, the intruder had done this after he'd assaulted Mingzi. We know that because Mingzi's blood was on the stairs in the form of footwear marks, and her blood was on the drawers in the form of finger marks, glove marks in blood. In my mind, your average burglar, if they're startled, they're just going to want to get out of the property. They don't want to harm anybody, they just don't want to get caught. Why would a perpetrator repeatedly beat Mingzi and then take the risk of going upstairs to see if they could find something in her bedroom? It just didn't quite add up.
By re-examining the post-mortem results, police suspect this attack may actually have been carried out by someone closer to home.
The nature and the number of injuries and the fact that they were all caused to Mingzi's head area is a suggestion that perhaps this is a little bit more personal. It's almost like a humiliation and perhaps not just a stranger attack or a burglar that's been disturbed.
Considering the nature of Mingzi's injuries, the police would have to consider whether this was an argument that had gone wrong.
In the majority of murder cases, there is some kind of connection between the victim and the offender.
90% of murders are committed by people who know the victim, and normally very closely.
As police begin to suspect that Mingzi could have known her attacker and that whoever it was had a grudge against her, they look to her previous relationships, beginning with her ex-husband, 33-year-old Wai Hong Sang.
Police contacted Mr. Sang. He lived in the Grimsby area. He was a chemistry graduate with dual nationality, so he was a Brit as well as Chinese. He had gone through a recent divorce with Mingzi, and they shared a son together.
Police want to know where Sang was on the day his ex-wife was murdered.
Mr. Sang was asked to provide a written statement of his movements on the 17th. He disclosed to police that he had taken the day off work.
Sang's statement explains why he took the day off and outlines a clear alibi for the time Mingzi was murdered.
He had the day off work and he went to Sherwood Pines in the Nottingham area, where he went trail biking.
And he could provide car parking tickets and receipts to back this up.
With a solid alibi and evidence to prove it, Sang is discounted from the inquiries. So police shift their focus elsewhere, and to one person in particular.
The police, they would be examining who Mingzi had spoken to, who were the last people that had seen her. Obviously, in this case, Darren Grundy was virtually living at Mingzi Yang's address.
Darren Grundy would likely to have been the last person to see Mingzi Yang alive. He's the person who's in a current relationship with her. He's the person who discovered the body.
Mingzi Yang's fiancé, Darren Grundy, is taken in for questioning. And it isn't long before the police make an announcement.
Darren Grundy is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Mingzi Yang. He's taken into police custody, and the police think that they have their man.
All of Darren's clothing was seized and submitted to the laboratory for examination.
The police were convinced it obviously had the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
It's been 24 hours since the body of 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang was discovered at her home in the Lincoln suburb of Sinsel Bank. And police have arrested her fiancé, 32-year-old Darren Grundy, on suspicion of murder.
Darren Grundy was the person that reported her death and was also possibly the last person to see her alive.
He was taken into police custody, during which time he's questioned and the police seek to gather further evidence and information to strengthen their case.
Police believe the attack on Mingzi was carried out by someone who knew her.
Police were convinced that this was a crime of passion. It's not unusual with crimes of passion that the victim is badly beaten. Mingzi had been beaten and sustained over 20 injuries.
The hallmarks of a crime of passion, I would say, are extreme violence, humiliation, degradation, that sort of thing. Doing something that's really personal, so, destroying something that really means a lot to somebody. And often it is extreme, gratuitous violence where there's clearly been some kind of loss of self-control because it is such a personal issue.
Now in police custody, Darren faces intense questioning from detectives.
The interview of a murder suspect is different from the interview of a witness. It's far more detailed. The officers that interview a murder suspect will be specially trained, and they use tactics and techniques with the intention of getting as much information as possible. During the interviews, Darren Grundy maintains that he went to work that day and he was trying to get hold of Mingzi Yang during the day, couldn't get hold of her, so he decided to leave work early. And he came home from work early and he found her dead in the home.
But police aren't convinced by his account and detain him further.
In order to hold someone in custody for more than 36 hours, the police need to go to a magistrate's court in order to keep that person in custody. So this is a serious situation for Darren Grundy. He's in custody, and obviously the police think that they have their man.
When police receive forensic results from Darren Grundy's clothing, the findings change the course of the investigation.
When we looked at Darren's clothing in the laboratory, there was no blood spattering on there. The blood staining on him was quite minimal, and it's not what I would expect from the perpetrator. I would expect to find a lot of small spots of blood on the perpetrator's clothing, especially around his lower legs. If you imagine when Mingzi's moving around the room and she's being constantly struck, the blood is spattering onto that radiator. Those small spots of blood will also spatter back onto the assailant. Didn't see anything like that at all on Darren's clothing.
But then a member of the public comes forward with some information that turns the case on its head.
The Sinsel Bank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community. And following the news of Mingzi's death, the teenage boy who was in the Sinsel Bank area on the morning of Mingzi's murder did come forward. He reported to police that he had seen a cyclist loitering very closely to the back passage of Mingzi's address.
The young boy saw a man on the pedal cycle cycling around this area, and he actually saw him go into an alleyway, which is where the address in question is.
He remembered clearly that that cyclist was wearing a blue workman's helmet rather than a cycling helmet. He made eye contact with the cyclist and then watched as he wheeled that bike into Mingsi's passageway.
But who was the cyclist? And could they be responsible for Mingsi's murder? The physical description the boy gives narrows down his identity.
This key witness reported to police the cyclist was also of East Asian appearance. The police now had to explore people who knew Mingsi matching that description.
And at this point, the police become aware that actually they've been looking at the wrong man. And they focus their inquiries in a different direction.
Darren Grundy is released without charge. And attention now falls on an individual from Mingsi's past.
The description of the cyclist matched Mingsi's ex-husband, Mr. Sang.
Wai Hong Sang had already provided police with a convincing alibi, saying he was over 40 miles from Mingsi's home on the day of her murder, enjoying a day out biking at Sherwood Pines Forest.
Mr. Sang has a solid alibi. He'd travelled to Sherwood Pines, where he had spent the day trail biking. So police are then tasked with establishing his movements exactly and whether it is possible that this cyclist could be Mr. Sang. In the eyes of the investigation, there is obviously a big difference between police suspecting that this cyclist may be Mr. Sang and may have committed the murder, but proving it to a jury is obviously a whole different matter.
In an attempt to track down the mysterious individual spotted by a local teenager, police trawl through thousands of hours of CCTV from across Lincoln.
There are so many CCTV cameras now, private, local authority. People have them on their houses as well. It's a real critical part of any murder investigation. The police will be looking at trying to find that person at that location or as close as possible, and then trying to find where they went from there. Where did the cyclist come from? Ideally, what did they do whilst they were in the area, and then where did they go afterwards?
And after hours of rigorous detective work, police finally spot the cyclist.
What it actually showed was that this particular cyclist, who was quite distinctive in description, particularly with a hat that he was wearing, was picked up on 40 separate occasions in 16 different locations in and around the Lincoln City area. The route of the cyclist was quite clear from the footage that he'd come into the city in the early hours of the morning, then made his way out of the city again.
The man is seen cycling away from Lincoln just after 9 a.m, around 3 hours before Mingsi's body was discovered. Detectives analyse the footage to see if the cyclist in question is indeed Mingsi's ex-husband, Wai Hong Sang.
One of the main difficulties in proving identity of someone on CCTV is the quality of the footage. It's vastly improved since many years ago when it was really poor, but you still do have systems now, for one reason or another, that are not particularly clear. They're grainy. You may struggle to identify someone.
With the identity of the cyclist still unclear from the CCTV footage, police bring Sang in for questioning.
The police will be looking at his background, his movements, and his relationship, trying to gather as much information. They'll be looking at inconsistencies with his account, and it may be that he can't give certain information. So they'll be trying to build up a case against him using the factual information that they know and anything which can either confirm or disprove his account.
Under caution, Sang gives the same account he provided in his written statement.
Wei Sang told the police that he had gone to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham. He'd driven there, he'd driven straight there from his home address in Grimsby. and he'd been there for the duration of the day. He was also able to produce some receipts from parking in the Nottingham area and a petrol receipt as well.
Despite Sang providing receipts to prove his alibi, police attempt to investigate his digital footprint by looking into his phone activity on the day.
He had turned his phone off when he left home, which he said was the usual thing that he would do when he was going trail biking.
So what the police decided to do instead was to examine the sat-nav on his car.
And what officers discover reveals a major hole in Sang's story.
The inbuilt car sat-nav actually showed that he hadn't gone directly from Grimsby to Nottingham, but he'd driven from Grimsby to Lincoln, where he'd parked in a lay-by for at least 2 hours, and then afterwards had then gone to Nottingham. So there was a huge hole in the alibi.
It's a shocking revelation. Police now know Sang was parked up in a lay-by on the outskirts of Lincoln on the day of Mingzi's murder. Could it be that Sang had cycled from this location to Mingzi's home in Sinsel Bank? Police look again at the CCTV of the suspicious cyclist.
The analysis of the cyclist and the CCTV showed quite clearly with the times involved that he would have had the opportunity to have parked his vehicle on the outskirts of Lincoln, cycled into Lincoln to Mingzi's address, killed Mingzi, and then cycled back out of the city again, back to his car, and then driven to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham, where he claimed that he'd been all day.
This key CCTV evidence proved Mr. Sang did have the time available to cycle into Lincoln and murder his ex-wife.
But the CCTV footage is still unable to prove if Wai Hong Sang was at Mingzi's home on the day of the murder. The only evidence police have is circumstantial and unlikely to hold up in court. But then, forensic results from a search at Sang's address returned from the lab.
The police submit various items for forensic examination from Wai Sang. There were items which were actually purchased after he'd separated from Mingzi Yang.
We examined a number of items from him, including a watch. The watch, when you looked at it with a naked eye, it didn't look as though there was anything on it at all. So I think the watch had probably been cleaned. But in the laboratory, once we could look at it using a low-power microscope, we could manipulate the hinges, the links, and you could see that in between the links there were some small blood stains. Those samples of blood stains were then subject to DNA profiling tests, and the blood was attributable to Mingzi.
As well as the traces of Mingzi's blood found on her ex-husband's watch, further shocking evidence is found on a bicycle belonging to Sang.
The bike that we examined was a different bicycle from the bike in the CCTV, but it was in the car on the day. The initial visual examination of that bicycle, we couldn't find any blood. But once we got it in the laboratory with specialised lighting and the low-power microscope, there was a small blood stain that was located on the handlebar. Again, that was subject to DNA profiling test, and that came back blood attributable to Mingzi. So from my examination of these objects, it was obvious that he has tried to cover all of his tracks, and he has done so quite successfully because we've only found these two small blood stains. We examined many other items from that individual and didn't find anything on them. And he's obviously done a good job of covering his tracks, but these minute traces left in these difficult to locate areas is what indicated that he was the perpetrator.
Wai Hong Sang is charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Mingzi Yang.
The police have circumstantial evidence. They have Wai Sang in Lincoln in the area at the time of the murder. They have the forensic evidence that links him as well. What they haven't got is a specific motive or a reason why he's committed this awful attack on his ex-wife.
Police obviously believed they had their man, but now they had to prove a motive. Why had Mr. Sang chosen to kill his ex-wife?
"33-year-old Wai Hong Sang has been charged with the murder of his ex-wife, 29-year-old Mingzi Yang, in the Sinsel Bank area of Lincoln. Having pleaded not guilty, the case is sent for trial.
Mr. Sang's trial was heard at Lincoln Crown Court, which is a very old courtroom in the grounds of Lincoln Castle. It is all a wood panel building. The judge sits high above the courtroom in a wooden seat. The defendant sits opposite in the dock, and witnesses give evidence to his right. It is a very personal experience for everybody in the room.
As any officer involved in a murder case, you always will feel an amount of apprehension before a murder trial, because no matter how strong the case appears to be, and no matter how happy you are with how the investigation has gathered pace and been concluded at that point, there's always an opportunity and a chance that something could come up during the trial that could change the direction of things. And even if it is a technicality or something that doesn't directly impinge on the actual case itself, sometimes that can be something that influences a jury in a kind of negative way.
As the trial begins, local reporter Richard Van Plu observes Mingzi's alleged killer in the courtroom.
Sang was very composed. He was obviously a very intelligent man and was following the proceedings intently, but showed little emotion.
The prosecution opens their case against Sang.
The prosecution presented a strong case, backed by the CCTV evidence and the sat-nav evidence, but it wasn't an overwhelming case.
The prosecution in the case were looking to show that there was a degree of pre-planning and preparation in this case, the way Sang had behaved, the fact that he'd lied about where he'd been, that he came to Lincoln in his vehicle, then came on his pedal cycle into the city centre. The fact that there were so many injuries inflicted on Mingzi Yang, it was clearly a personal attack, and it was clearly something that he'd planned, and he'd tried to cover his tracks very carefully.
The pathology evidence presented at trial showed that the injury that most likely killed Mingzi was a brutal wound to the head. But the murder weapon was never recovered, and the prosecution suggested that this meant it was carried out by somebody with premeditation who had taken that weapon away and made sure that it wasn't found.
To the courtroom's surprise, Sang agrees to give evidence.
As a journalist in the courtroom, you sit in a wood-panelled seat right next to the witness box where Mr. Sang gave evidence. And confronted by the evidence from the sat-nav, Sang gave an account that he did leave his car in the lay-by near Lincoln. This differed from the account that he initially gave the police.
Sang agrees that yes, he did go to Lincoln, but rather than going into Lincoln City on a push bike, he said that he drove to the outskirts of Lincoln, he parked in a lay-by, and he slept for a couple of hours.
And the reason he gave for not telling the police this during his first account was that he didn't want his new partner to find out that he'd been sleeping.
The prosecution confronts Sang with the CCTV footage from the day of the murder. They are convinced this is Sang heading towards Sinsel Bank.
Sang was adamant that the cyclist in the blue work helmet was not him, and that he remained in his car asleep on the outskirts of Lincoln.
Wei Sang denies being the person on the pedal cycle. He simply says it's not him.
Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence against Sang, the court are yet to hear a motive behind the killing. But then, details of Mingzi and Sang's marriage are revealed to the jury.
It's revealed that there was a history of coercion and abuse from Wei Sang against Ming Xiang. It's been going on for some time before they actually divorced. Domestic abuse is very rarely isolated. It's something that will often go on perhaps for years. I read a statistic recently that said that there were 50 incidents of domestic abuse that would normally occur before someone calls for help. And the victim will often put up with abuse or coercion for a long period of time before they eventually come to the point where they actually ask for help. Ming Xiang had actually reported previous incidents of domestic abuse to Humberside Police on 3 separate occasions before she moved to Lincoln and actually before Darren Grundy had come onto the scene.
In 2012, Mingzi divorced from Sang and moved to Lincoln to start a new life for herself. The pair then only saw each other when handing over their son to one another as part of an arrangement made by the court. The abuse that she had suffered appeared to have ended. But then, relations with her former husband took a sudden drop.
During the trial, it was established that the divorce between Mingzi and Sang had not been straightforward. There had been some disagreements over the custody of their son. And obviously, that is something that can raise very high emotions.
Mingzi and Sang had initially settled on shared custody of their son. But in the lead up to that fateful morning, it appears Mingzi had put in motion plans to end this.
They shared custody, but the prosecution put the motive on the basis that he got a letter a few days before where she wanted more custody of their son.
Wei Sang had received at least one letter in relation to those custody arrangements, so it's believed that actually Ming Xiang was looking to see more of her son, and Wei Sang wasn't happy with that, and this potentially was the reason why he killed her. In my experience, in a case involving children and personal relationships, it can be something on the face of it quite simple, and in isolation perhaps not as serious, that can send somebody over the edge. Could potentially be a build-up of tension and stress over a period of time, and the person just kind of snaps.
In January 2015, the jury at Lincoln Crown Court returns its verdict. Wei Hong Zhang is found guilty of Mingzi Yang's murder. He is sentenced to a minimum of 28 years in prison.
At the end of the trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of murder. They were obviously convinced by the prosecution case and returned an extremely quick verdict for a murder case. They took just 2 hours to find Sang guilty.
Wei Sang, I would say, was a cold-hearted individual, self-centred, deceitful, and clearly very violent.
But with his cleverly constructed alibi, initially deceiving police, was there a chance that Sang could have walked away with murder?
This case stands out because the murderer prepared a very clever alibi before carrying out the killing. It is not unusual for people to try and create an alibi after they carry out a murder or a killing. But in my career as a crime reporter, there are probably only 2 or 3 other cases where someone has gone to such great lengths.
He's sat down and thought this through. He's obviously an intelligent person. He's covered his tracks. It just tells me that, yeah, he is that kind of cold, calculated kind of a person.
If it wasn't for the blood on the bike and the watch, although he is on the outskirts of Lincoln, it's not beyond reasonable doubt that a jury could have been convinced that he wasn't a cyclist.
The case really turned on the forensic evidence. You know, he may well have got away with that murder in years gone by, but fortunately with the advances in forensic science and the specialist CCTV that's available and the experts nowadays, he was quite rightly tracked down and sentenced.
If this murder had happened 30 years ago, at the start of my career, it's probably quite unlikely that he would have been convicted.
With Sang now behind bars, the community reflects on the impact Mingzi's death has had on her family.
It's so traumatic. She was so young and she moved here, she wanted a better life, but she hasn't witnessed a whole life yet.
I think this case is shocking in terms of the level and the nature of the injuries. The sentence reflects the seriousness of the offence. Hopefully it may bring some small comfort to Mingzi's family moving forward. But at the end of the day, nothing will bring Mingzi Yang back, and it leaves a young boy growing up without his mother.
There's more shocking true crime Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix, when a victim of circumstance is in the wrong place at the wrong time in New Murdered at First Sight.
Please, how can I help?
I need to report a missing person. She's only 16. She's not come home.
She'd never gone missing before. She's just staying at her friends, you know, she's hiding.
Maybe she's drunk a bit too much and she's sleeping it off.
My Facebook blew up with her face, basically. It was everywhere.
I just remember wondering what's happened and what's going on.
You know, the gut feeling was getting stronger and stronger that something serious had happened.
This is something you see on the TV, this is something you read in papers.
There was a huge search operation going on over many days involving dogs, air support and boots on the ground.
And I knew then that that was my Louise. I knew she'd gone.
In the Hampshire town of Havant sits the close-knit community of Lee Park.
It's a nice, quiet area. It's nice living here, friendly. My neighbours are really nice, you know. It's a very, very cosy area to live in.
I've lived here 47 years now. People's all lovely. I enjoyed the place, I really do.
It's safe, and that's what made us move here, was the fact that it was safe and secure. There was very little crime.
When things happen, the community does pull together and help the people out. So I think in a whole, Lee Park is a good place to live.
Lee Park is also the home to popular 16-year-old Louise Smith.
As a baby, like as a newborn, she was really just quite a quiet baby, to be honest. She used to sleep through the night regularly.
She was just a really good little girl. Bradley, my brother, used to come and stay with me with her. And she'd just come in and say, "Can I play with your shoes, Auntie Hayley?" She'd go in my shoe cupboard, get all my shoes, and she'd clonk up and down the kitchen and in the hall, and she loved it. She loved dressing up, you know. She was just so, oh, she was just a lovely little girl, really good girl.
And as she grew up and she began to toddle around, you know, she started to show a cheeky sense of humour. You know, sometimes I'd look at her and she just had a certain look in her eye, and I just knew she was going to come out with something. I just knew straight away. You know, she was quite a bright and happy child.
As a young teenager, Louise enjoyed holidays and days out with her aunts and nan, and loved going to theme parks with family friend Sharon.
Louise, honestly, she had adrenaline rush on the roller coasters, especially on the Smiler at Alton Towers. She'd come to Legoland, she'd come to Chesington. She loved Chesington, especially like the tigers and that. Louise was like my own daughter. We just really enjoyed each other's company.
Louise's parents split, and her father Bradley later moved to Scotland, but maintained a close relationship.
I used to have her every fortnight for a weekend. School holidays, half terms, I'd have her for a week. And one summer holiday, she stayed with me for 5 weeks, you know, because she just wanted to stay with me. And so, you know, whenever I could, she came up to visit. We went to Edinburgh. She always wanted to see Greyfriars Bobby and touch his nose, the statue for luck. By chance, when she came up, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival was on, and we walked around and saw it, and she loved it. I could have as much contact with her as I wanted. I was always allowed a good relationship with her, you know, without any problems.
After school, Louise moved to a local college and studied veterinary care.
She loved animals. There was no doubt about that. She absolutely loved animals. Like I said, we went to Chesington, and out of everything, it was the animal shows she wanted to watch.
She just wanted to do anything, I think, with animals. You know, and the world was her oyster. I think her plans were just to get the course done and then decide what direction she was going to take with it.
Being a typical teenager, it wasn't long before Louise's attention shifted towards other interests.
Louise always had a boyfriend, always interested in boys. She's a very pretty girl, so there was no reason for her not to have a boyfriend. But some boyfriends wasn't the right sort of boyfriend for her.
She went to college, and I think she had a boyfriend and she struggled a bit, and I think she just wanted to be with him a lot. She wasn't interested in anything else, you know, she just wanted to be with him.
It's like I'd rather talk to my boyfriend than my parents, you know what I mean? It was one of them. But certainly had had chats with her, the do's and don'ts. Not that she'd ever bloody listen to me, but yeah.
But in March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the UK. And a national lockdown meant that Louise would be spending more time isolated at her mum's house. Unable to see her new boyfriend, tensions started to grow at home, prompting Louise to pack a bag and move in with her cousin and her husband, Shane Mays, nearby. And to begin with, she seemed happy. But a few months later, everything changed.
After Louise moved in Lee Park, she was regularly texting her friends saying how they treated her like a child. Having had an argument, Louise left the home address on the 7th of May. She was contacted numerous times on her phone, I think over 50 times, and didn't respond. But at some point, Louise decided to go home and clear the air, and things were sort of getting back to normal.
After making up with her cousin and Shane, the following morning, Louise makes plans for a special national holiday.
On the 8th of May, which was actually Victory in Europe Day 2020, where there were lots of celebrations going in gardens, etc., in people's homes, that morning she woke up and she did a Snapchat around about midday saying that she's got, you know, a huge hangover, her head hurts as a result of drinking. It was established that Louise was going to meet her boyfriend at the skate park at around about 3 p.m. that afternoon. But we know that Louise didn't arrive at the skate park, and that's when concerns were being raised by her boyfriend.
Louise's cousin makes numerous attempts to call her mobile. But after an hour of phoning, the line disconnects. And by 6 p.m, Louise's cousin is left with no choice but to call 999.
Some details would have been taken by the call taker at that point to establish how high risk Louise was, so what were her vulnerabilities. Obviously, she was 16 years of age, so one would argue she's still a child and therefore vulnerable anyway. But we would also look at our records to see what we know about Louise. Some could say she was streetwise, only been missing 3 hours, not particularly alarming at that particular point, and there was no other information to suggest she would be high risk at that stage.
With the case considered fairly low risk, police don't arrive at Louise's cousin's address until 1 a.m. to write up a missing persons report.
And those inquiries would be basic inquiries, speaking to friends and family, where she may be hanging out.
Shane explains to police that he accompanied Louise towards the skate park in Emsworth that afternoon, before heading off in a different direction towards Tesco. Officers want to know if there could be any reason why Louise may have left of her own accord.
So if it came out that she had had a falling out, then the police may take the view, well, she's sulking, she's just going to be staying with a friend or hanging around the park or something overnight, teaching them a bit of a lesson to worry about, you know, and then she'll turn up safe and well in the morning.
But the following morning, there is still no signs of Louise.
I actually got a message saying Louise has gone missing, but lockdown was on, and I technically was in a different country. I didn't know if I could travel. I was trying to arrange things.
She'd never gone missing before. She'd obviously stayed at people's houses, but she always let people know where she was. I just thought, no, she hadn't. She's just it's drama. It was like, you know, I thought, no, perhaps she's just saying it just to let everyone believe that she's gone missing. She's just staying at her friends, you know, she's hiding.
Yet as friends and family try to reach out to Louise with no luck, concern sets in.
It was completely out of character for her to disappear entirely, especially not be on her phone, because she was always on her phone. That was the scary thing. That was the thing that niggled in my mind, you know, made me think, maybe something has happened, maybe something has happened. But I tried to block them thoughts out and think of it differently and go, no, she's just missing, she's going to turn up, because the alternative was just too upsetting.
In the Hampshire suburb of Lee Park, concern is growing for 16-year-old Louise Smith, who was last seen heading towards a nearby skate park the previous afternoon to meet her boyfriend. And with a missing person investigation underway, police attempt to paint a picture of Louise's life before she disappeared.
I would describe Louise as a typical 16-year-old girl. She was going through that phase with her mother where she was starting to rebel a little bit. She wanted her own independence. They would regularly have arguments at home. She wanted to spend more time with her boyfriend. And you've got to remember, this was at a time during the pandemic when lockdown was occurring, and so tensions were high in most households, I would suggest.
Police also take into consideration what else was going on during the day Louise vanished.
The day that Louise went missing was the 8th of May, which was VE Day, and that was being celebrated nationally. So there were lots of parties going on, but because this was lockdown, the government restrictions at that time meant that you could only celebrate in your garden. But there was a huge party atmosphere going on within the community. And again, as a police officer, you're thinking, well, perhaps Louise has gone to one of these parties, and maybe she's drunk a bit too much and she's sleeping it off. If she's gone to friends and it is during lockdown, then potentially the friends might be thinking, well, I may have committed an offence here during lockdown, and I don't want to tell the police that Louise is staying with me. So there's some additional difficulties at that particular time with that missing person inquiry.
As the hours tick by, police dig deeper, questioning friends and family in the hope of finding clues into Louise's disappearance.
Louise was 16 years of age. She's vulnerable by definition of her age anyway. We know that she'd had problems at home in the past. We know that she'd had mental health problems, and also she was using alcohol. So all this information coming in really ramps up our concerns and makes her a high-risk missing person because of those vulnerabilities. And so her being out and not in contact with anyone is really concerning for me, because she's a risk, and not just to family members, but you know, other people out there could take advantage of her.
And as night turns to morning, police issue an appeal to the public for sightings of Louise.
When she didn't materialise the following day, that's when the concerns were raised. And so, as you would normally do with a missing person inquiry, you would release details of Louise's image to the local media. You'd be asking for the public's help. You know, did you see Louise? You know, was she at one of these parties?
So I'm on a lot of Facebook groups, local Facebook groups around the area, and there was missing pages saying that, you know, have you seen this girl? But yeah, it was just, my Facebook blew up with her face, basically. It was everywhere.
When we found out Louise was missing, I said we was all worried about her.
I just remember being there, missing posters, being around, everyone wondering what's happened and what's going on.
It certainly took off on social media, and the community were doing all they can to try and find Louise by reposting the appeals that the police had put out.
Police continue to focus their inquiries in the area where Louise was reportedly last seen, the Emsworth skate park.
Officers would be tasked to survey the area to see what CCTV cameras were in that area, going along the most obvious routes to take you to the skate park in Emsworth. We would capture that CCTV, which would be quite a time-consuming process, and then someone would have to review that footage.
And while police scour the area for CCTV, the local community also gets involved in the search for Louise.
A lot of people around Emsworth are looking for her because obviously that was the last place she was seen. That was their centre point, and what I'm working out from there.
The community seemed to come together to try and sort of help everybody to sort of get through the situation that we were in.
There was people out all the time, in family and in the community of Lee Park. There was loads of people out and about looking for her. You know, it was a massive, massive hunt. There was lots of volunteers as well looking for her.
I did go out in the car many of times looking for her. I remember once that I thought I'd see her and I jumped out the motor and I was hoping it was her, I think. And it did really look like her. Unfortunately, it wasn't her. But I wanted to do all I could for Louise in the hope that I was going to find her.
There was a hell of a lot of hope that Louise Smith was going to be found safe and well.
But as 2 days pass, there is still no signs of Louise.
As the case got on during the lockdown, there was no more news. It started to get a bit more escalated, and it definitely was an atmosphere in the local area.
The gut feeling was getting stronger and stronger that something serious had happened.
I think with any missing person inquiry, statistically, if someone isn't located within about 48 hours, the chances are they may not be alive.
I think I just didn't allow myself to think like that because the hope of her still, of her turning up overrode everything out because that was my only concern. I just wanted my little girl to turn up.
But it's when police look into the reason why Louise moved out of her mum's home at the start of lockdown, concern grows.
She'd had an argument with her mum and she didn't like the boyfriend of the mum, who her mum used to call her stepdad. She didn't like him. She did not like him at all. So in the end, that's why she moved. That's why she moved out.
Could this revelation be in any way connected to Louise's disappearance? But after making their inquiries, police are able to rule out Louise's stepdad from the investigation. Attention then turns to Louise's boyfriend, who was due to have met her the afternoon of her disappearance.
We were told that Louise was intending to meet her boyfriend at the skate park in Emsworth at 3 p.m. that afternoon.
Her boyfriend was a nice guy. I dated him in year 9 for about a month. There's little teenage little thing, just when you're kids, and we was good friends, and I see him sometimes around here.
But Louise's boyfriend claims she never turned up as arranged. So where did Louise go? With Louise's phone still switched off, police retrieve cell phone data to try to track her whereabouts on the day she went missing, to establish if she did walk to the skate park.
So we would expect to look at the call data and the cell site analysis to show that that's where her phone is moving. But actually what it did show was that it was moving in a completely different direction towards Havant Thicket. What a phone tells you is where the phone is. It doesn't necessarily tell you where the person is. So it could have been that Louise has lost her phone and someone's taken that phone and it's headed off in that direction. It could have been she'd been robbed and that phone's gone there. So always keeping an open mind.
6 days into Louise's disappearance, there's a sudden breakthrough. 2 people are arrested in Lee Park.
I was just shocked. It was something that I just thought, this is something you see on the TV, this is something you read in papers, and I couldn't believe it. I was just gobsmacked.
Louise's cousin and her husband, Shane Mays, are taken in for questioning.
Both were interviewed at length by detectives at local police stations. And Shane was adamant that he had done nothing wrong. As far as he was concerned, he walked with Louise the route that he said he walked towards the skate park, where she was then going to meet her boyfriend at 3 o'clock, and that was the last he saw of her.
But for police investigating Shane's account, things don't add up. Having trawled hours of CCTV footage of the local area, there is no sign of Louise or Shane heading towards the skate park.
An alarm bells start to ring in relation to Shane Mays. You start questioning, well, why is he lying? I think once you establish that perhaps some lies have been told to the police by people that were responsible for caring for Louise at that time, concern starts to raise.
The latest evidence raises suspicion against Shane. But what led to his wife's arrest?
I think when you look at the fact that she reported her missing only 3 hours after sort of a last sighting of Louise, because for me, a 16-year-old not coming home at 6 o'clock in the evening is not particularly something to be concerned about, particularly when it's not the parents raising the alarm. When you layer that with the other information that we're getting, it's starting to paint a picture that is one of concern. So having exhausted pretty much our inquiries based around the account that Shane had given us and also looking at Louise's phone data, it got to the point where we had made a decision that Shane hadn't been completely honest with us around Louise's movements and her disappearance. And so the decision was taken to arrest both of them on suspicion of kidnap.
In Havant, 16-year-old Louise Smith has been missing for 6 days after she failed to meet her boyfriend at a local skate park. Analysis of phone records and CCTV has failed to show signs of Louise going there, and investigations soon rule out her boyfriend. But police have arrested Louise's cousin and her husband, Shane Mays, on suspicion of her kidnap.
So Shane Mays, I would describe, he was a 30-year-old man. He was out of work. His day consisted of pretty much getting up in the morning, going to the shops, returning home, and then spending numerous hours on his computer, playing games. Didn't appear to be actively looking for work.
Louise never said to me, oh, I'm scared of him or anything like that. She never said that to me. She never told me that.
With both Shane and his wife in custody, police conduct a search of their home for any sign of Louise.
The police would have been looking for obvious evidence, but also it would have been a forensic search as well. So we would have seized all of their clothing that would have been worn on that day. We would have gone through any computers that were there. We would have taken phones as well to establish their movements, see if there were any other phones that we weren't aware of.
Police find no evidence of Louise still in the house. So focus turns to Havant Thicket, since that was the last location of Louise's phone signal.
What it allowed us to do was then focus all of our resources in that area to really flush out, what clues were there and hopefully try and identify where Louise would be. And so there was a huge search operation going on over many days involving dogs, air support and boots on the ground looking for Louise or clues to establish where Louise may be. But also we could then move our media appeal to people that were using Havant Thicket on that day, VE celebration day, where a lot of people, would have been out getting their fresh air during lockdown and may have seen something suspicious. So we were really focusing on that area at that point.
While the search for Louise intensifies, police have no concrete evidence to prove Shane or his wife had anything to do with her disappearance.
A decision was taken to release them on bail, but with conditions that they reside elsewhere other than their home address. And so they were placed in a local hotel near to their home address, which gave us the time and space to actually conduct our inquiries at their home address without interference from either party.
You had a watch on 24 hours a day. There were 77 officers, vehicles surrounding the block. You had them knocking on doors in the general area, obviously trying to see if they could get any further information.
The police had been working on a theory of kidnap. But 13 days after going missing, everything changed.
Louise's body was found in the north of the thicket, covered up. Louise's body had been severely damaged, both by fire but also by violence, we believe. There was some attempt to cover up the body with sticks and wood. Clearly, a fire had been set. It was fairly obvious at that point that this wasn't an accident, this wasn't self-harm, but this was a murder.
We're just approaching the area where Louise's body was found, and you can see it's hugely dense here. You can't even see the footpath that we've just come off of, so you can only imagine what it would be like in the summer when you've got those really tall ferns around. So this is the site where sadly Louise was found, and yeah, I mean there's a fire that's taking place here. I think that's what saddens me about this, is should be an area where kids can come and play and you know, have fun and relax and feel safe. But this kind of beautiful location has really been tarred now with this horrific attack.
With a body found, the crime scene is immediately locked down and preserved so the body can be formally identified and clues to a potential suspect can be uncovered. And a pathologist is called in.
I was asked to attend at Havant Thicket. It was very clear from quite a distance away that we were dealing with a severely burnt body. Thinking about the nature of the attack at the scene, it was simply obvious that there was some severe damage to the face. Now that implied heavy impacts of some sort, and it was also clear that a stick had been inserted into the body. That's the sort of thing that could not possibly have happened accidentally. And so it was a question of identifying the particular stick and suggesting to the police how this might be managed. In this particular case, I said to them, I think what you need to do is to collect any DNA you can before anybody touches it.
With the true horror of the crime unfolding, the police need to know who could be responsible for such a callous and brutal killing.
As far as any more detail is concerned, there was really nothing much I could tell the police otherwise until we'd got on and got the body to the mortuary and examined in more detail.
And while Louise's remains are taken to the mortuary and DNA samples taken to the laboratory for examination, it isn't long before news reaches Louise's father while on his way to England to join the search.
We was about halfway on the journey when I got the call to say they'd found a body. I was told, you can't tell anyone, you can't tell anyone. You know, nobody, not even your family, in case they say something, because it could jeopardise the case. It was a very anxious journey because I just wanted to get here and, you know, see firsthand what was going on, what's happening.
I had somebody message me that they had seen a black private ambulance come out of the thicket. I got in the motor. I drove down to the thicket. Obviously, we weren't allowed into the thicket. I had my friend in the car with me, and there was just police everywhere. And I knew then that that was my Louise. I knew she'd gone.
I remember it vividly, but I got the family round because Bradley was coming down. He came in and told me in the kitchen, and I just broke down. I went, nah, it's not her. He went, Hayley, there's been a body found. I went, no, it's not her, it's not her. They got it wrong. It's not her. I just didn't think it would be.
The news that everyone feared spreads across the tight-knit community.
When I read the story on one of the local community pages saying that a body had been found, they couldn't reveal who it was, but parents of Louise had been told. And it was absolutely horrible.
The outpouring of grief was huge within the community. particularly on social media. There was a huge sense of upset and disbelief, and I guess despair, really, and I think the same for the police. I think when you're dealing with a missing person inquiry, you're always hoping that you're going to find that person safe and well. And then when you do find a body, it just punches you in the guts, really.
The hunt for Louise's killer is now on. And firmly in the police's sights is one man, Shane Mays. The person who had been looking after Louise.
What we found at about 3:10 that afternoon was an image of Shane Mays coming out of Havant Thicket and walking towards his mother's address, which is close by. Having said that, he was at the other end of the town near the skate park in Emsworth.
The CCTV evidence places Shane near the scene of the crime. And when police receive forensic evidence, there's a breakthrough.
Having carried out a number of examinations both at the crime scene and also through post-mortem examination on Louise, and also the search that we did back at the Mays flat, we were able to establish that we had a DNA match from Shane Mays on a wooden stick that was found at the crime scene near Louise's body. But also a speck of blood was also found on his trainers, which came back to Louise's DNA.
Shane Mays is rearrested, but this time he's charged with the murder of Louise Smith. His wife is also rearrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. At a hearing, Shane Mays pleads not guilty to murder, which means a trial will ultimately take place.
I'd say the pressure really starts at that point, because you'll then set fairly quickly a trial date where you need to be trial ready. It's a painstaking process. You need to be 100% sure that that is the person that you say is the killer of your victim.
After further investigations and without any evidence against Shane's wife, she is released without charge. With all evidence pointing to Shane Mays and a trial now set, the question everyone wants the answer to is why would Shane want to brutally murder a 16-year-old girl living in his care? Shane Mays has been charged with the murder of 16-year-old Louise Smith after DNA and CCTV evidence linked him to the crime. While police prepare a case for trial, Louise's family and friends have the agonizing task of saying goodbye to their loved one.
The day of Louise's funeral, there was hundreds and hundreds of people. People had gone out and put purple bows the night before her funeral on the lampposts.
The community just all pulled together. It was lovely. They all stood out on the streets, and right from outside her house right up to the crematorium.
Seeing everybody out there, it was overwhelming. For me, personally, being a very private person as well, it was also quite wonderful just to know that they were there. And Lou would have been looking down thinking, wow, I didn't realise I was so loved. And, everyone was there, everyone. It was just, the world stopped just for a moment, just for her.
Six months after Louise's funeral, the trial is set to begin at Winchester Crown Court. But just as the court case begins, there's a surprising twist.
Day one of the trial, his defence team entered a plea for guilty to manslaughter. So effectively he was saying, I admit to killing Louise, but I didn't mean to do it.
He basically then admitted that he had taken her to have a chat and everything because they'd had a falling out the night before, and that he basically just wanted to chat with her. They argued, she hit him with a stick apparently, and then he attacked her because he lost his temper. He just lost control.
He said that he just hit her and punched her in the face and did what he did to her, horrific things. And then he said he walked away and he heard her moaning.
We examined that plea. We weren't happy with that. We were confident it was a murder. We were confident this was pre-planned. And so we stuck with our guns and said, no, this is a murder trial, and that's what we're going to be seeking for.
As the prosecution presents its case, the jury is shown a Snapchat video showing Shane tickling Louise's feet while she was staying with him.
Some of the things we heard in court was there was a lot of, you know, flirting going on between Shane and Louise, and, you know, she was still a child. He should not have been interacting with her in the way that he was. It wasn't appropriate at all.
But according to neighbours, Shane had a more aggressive side.
The feeling of my wife and I being around Shane Mays was one that we didn't want to be around him. Shane would be the sort of person, I believe, that would belt you for something if he thought you'd done something wrong. Running up the days to the incident, because they were upstairs neighbours, it was quite a lot of raised voices. A lot of it was targeted at Louise.
The court then hears how unhappy Louise really was while living at Shane Mays.
When it came out in court that she was reaching out to other people, she hadn't spoken to me about it. The only indication I ever got was one day she just said, look, I don't want to stay, I don't want to be here at the moment, Dad. I want to come up and see you. And as I said, lockdown stopped that plan, unfortunately. So it was horrible. It was an awful thing for me to deal with, you know, because I just felt like I'd let her down.
2 days before Louise's disappearance, she phoned me and said she needed some lady products. And I believe that that might have been a cry for help because she wasn't happy. And unfortunately, I blame myself that I let her down. And I do live with that, knowing maybe if I'd gone and took that to her, that she might have just opened up to me and told me.
The court is shown CCTV of Louise and Shane walking together the day before her murder.
The day before the incident, we actually saw them. Louise did actually say hello, but that was about all. She seemed very reserved. I think Shane was having a really bad influence on her, to sort of try not to speak to anybody, just focusing on getting back up to their flat.
The prosecution reveals to the court horrific details from the post-mortem.
In Louise's case, the whole central part of her face and both jaws had been broken into many pieces. The lower jaw in a couple of places, and the upper jaw and the whole facial skeleton from the eyebrows down to the teeth, broken into many pieces. Implication of that is that there have been some heavy blows from a heavy object. And the obvious thing in woodland would be a heavy branch of some sort, something of that kind. Large parts of the body had been burnt off. The upper limbs, the head, much of the chest, much of the belly wall at the sides especially, and to a certain extent at the front.
The level of damage to Louise's body meant it was almost impossible to establish a cause of death. But the most shocking bit of information was yet to come.
It was also clear that a stick had been inserted into the body. Something that I was asked about specifically was whether or not Louise was pregnant. Now, there was nothing left at autopsy to say that she might have been pregnant. The womb muscle itself was really quite well preserved. The lining of the womb that gives you a better idea of whether she might have been pregnant or not, all gone, long since vanished, so I couldn't say that. But the reason that's important is someone might have tried to, the assailant might have tried to disturb a pregnancy by putting a stick in there. That suggestion was made.
After days of breaking down all their evidence to the courtroom, the prosecution pieced together the full horror of what likely occurred during the last few hours of Louise's life.
That morning, Louise woke up and she'd arranged to meet her boyfriend that afternoon at the skate park in Emsworth. So having seen her phone active around about midday, we know that Louise and Shane Mays left the address around about 1 o'clock.
But instead of heading in the direction towards the skate park, her phone signal moves towards Havant Thicket. revealing Louise's final movements on foot with her killer.
How did Louise end up going to the thicket on foot with Shane Mays? There's no suggestion that she was forced there or dragged there. The thicket itself is huge, and there are so many areas you can go to where you could not see anyone else. That started to show that this was pre-planned and that he lured Louise to that location that was remote with the intention of possibly sexually assaulting her.
At some point, Shane assaults and murders Louise and is seen on CCTV leaving the thicket at 3:30 p.m, heading towards his mum's house. Around 5 p.m, he arrives at Iceland Supermarket in Lee Park.
He went and bought some pizzas for both him, CJ and Louise, knowing that Louise was never going to be returning home to eat that pizza.
By 6:30 p.m, Shane's wife calls the police, reporting Louise missing.
Hello, police, how can I help? I need to report a missing person. She's only 16. She's not come home.
But I think once the police became involved, I believe that he realised that at some stage we were probably going to locate Louise because her phone would show that she was in Havant Thicket. And so it's my belief that he returned to the crime scene at some stage, probably during nighttime hours, so that he wouldn't be seen. And he then built effectively a bonfire over Louise and set fire to her, possibly using an accelerant to destroy the evidence, knowing that it's highly unlikely that you'd get a dog walker or a pedestrian walking through the thicket during the night reporting a small fire taking place.
He went back a couple of days after and finished her off. We're hoping that she died instantly so she wouldn't go through all that pain.
After a grueling 3-week trial at Winchester Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. Shane Mays is found guilty of murder and is sentenced to 25 years in prison.
I don't believe he should ever get out. I've always been the one that says, you take a life, you should do a life.
I think capital punishment should be brought back. And I think they should lose their life like they took a life, but not straight away. I truly believe if you're sentenced to, as he was, 25 years, that he should serve that 25 years, knowing for that 25 years, at the end of that 25 years, he's going to die. Because that'll have to deal with him in his head all the time. It's a psychological thing. And to me, that's a fitting punishment.
With Shane Mays now behind bars, Louise's murder leaves a lasting mark on the local community.
Now I reflect on it and I think, I wished I'd done this or I wished I'd done that. But obviously what's done is done. I can't do nothing about it.
To think that something could happen of someone of her age, someone so young, dying of something so terrible, it makes you not want to walk the streets at night, especially as a female.
It's never going to be the same in our little community here, because of what's gone on. It's been wicked, really.
There's definitely a dark cloud lingering, definitely a sense of mourning, I guess, of Louise. And every time I drive past the thicket now, I always look in. You just think to yourself, that's where it happened.
I don't think I could ever go there, and I don't really see many people go there when I drive past to go to the local shop. It's really much of a barren, kind of left alone area now.
And 2 years since her passing, family and friends try to come to terms to life without Louise.
The thing that sticks in my mind is the last minutes of her life. Was she scared? You know, she must have been scared. She must have been so scared. That's what really hurts me. I think she must be calling out for us and we couldn't get to her.
People say time will heal. It doesn't. Time allows you to cope better. And I am starting to cope a bit better now, but I'm not there. You know, sometimes I'll be having a good time. I'll be having a great day, and then I feel guilty. Because I'm like, why should I be happy? Yeah, it's awful. And the whole family try to get on with it, but all of us think about her daily. Of course we do. Of course we do. We miss her.
Reserve your spot on that sofa for a front row seat to Super Sunday. It's Liverpool v Man City and the tension will be through the roof. Sunday at 3 on Sky Sports for a 3:45 kickoff.
She was a very popular student.
She'd more or less completed that morning her final A-level exam.
She had just vanished.
It was a huge shock for everyone around here.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? You know, it just doesn't happen.
I remember being woken up by the police helicopters.
The police helicopter picked up a person running away.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
This was every young parent's nightmare. The anguish of where is she? What's happened to her?
Police!
On the outskirts of Wigan lies the quiet and peaceful village of Orrell.
Orrell is a really nice place to live. It's pretty quiet. We've got everything we need on our doorstep.
We have loads of local shops. We have butchers, newsagents, coffee shops, craft shops. So we are very lucky around here. It's a lovely place to live.
I'd say it's one of the more affluent parts of Wigan. There's kind of a lot of wine bars and coffee shops. It's the type of place that's quite a close-knit community. There's a lot of families that have been in Orrell for a long time.
I grew up round here and it's always been, you know what I mean, a quiet place. It's a lot of older people, and you've got the style of people what still, till recently, still tip the cap. You know what I mean? It's like an old-fashioned area. Everybody knows everybody.
Most people have lived here all their lives because really there's no reason to move away.
The parkland on the edge of the village has long been a draw for locals.
Orrell Water Park's a little local recreation spot.
Come on, doggy.
So you get a lot of dog walkers coming here. A lot of people come just to kind of stretch the legs, walk the dog and get a little bit of fresh air.
I come here every day. A lot of dog walkers, families. Just a nice place to go for a change of scenery.
I mean, I've got 2 young kids. We take the kids around the park. A lot of people go fishing there.
There's always students around here. In the lunchtime or the breaks, if the weather's nice, to come and sit on the benches. You follow the path up there. It can take you up to Winstanley College across the fields.
With its outstanding reputation, Winstanley College attracts students from across the northwest.
Winstanley College is one of the top-rated sixth form colleges in the entire country. It draws ambitious, clever young people from across Greater Manchester, also parts of Lancashire and Merseyside.
It's always top standard. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody wanted to get into Winstanley.
It tends to get a lot of the kind of high achievers, and people who do well in the GCSEs will go to Winstanley because they want to get the good grades to go to good universities as well.
And in 2017, 18-year-old Ellen Higginbottom was in her second year at Winstanley College.
Ellen Higginbottom was a very popular student. She came from the edge of Manchester and she was studying for her A-levels. She was an only child to Michael and Kay Higginbottom. She was a talented musician. She enjoyed listening to and performing music, and she also had a notable love of equestrian and horses.
Being a teenager at the start of adulthood, Ellen had a large social network around her.
She had a big group of friends and was extremely popular with everybody at the college. She also had a very devoted boyfriend. They were clearly in a very close relationship.
But life for the young couple was about to change.
It was a very pleasant summer's afternoon. Ellen had more or less completed that morning, I think, her final A-level exam. So you can imagine the sort of mood that she and her friends were in, a celebratory mood.
Ellen had gone into Winstanley College earlier on in the day, and because of Ellen's age, she was clearly independent. So when her particular exam was done, she went out for a walk, which the students often did. She left the college, walked over the field at the back, and entered into Orrell Water Park. It's a pleasant place to go for an afternoon stroll. Perfectly normal thing to do. You know, she just went about her business. Nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever.
Ellen had told her friends she was going for a walk at the water park, then would meet up with them after their exams. But she failed to return to college at the arranged time.
With her friends, she was apparently renowned at getting lost.
She sent a joking Snapchat message to her friends saying that she'd been here about 15, 20 minutes and was already lost.
But as the hours pass and Ellen fails to meet her friends or return home, concern grows.
It was becoming clear in the afternoon. She'd not made contact with any friends or family. She'd never been missing before, so it was unusual.
Had Ellen wanted some time alone? Had she got lost? Or had she met up with someone to celebrate after her exams? With her disappearance so out of character, her boyfriend organises a search for Ellen across the area.
A number of close friends and relatives travelled up to Orrell and actually took to the streets asking people if they had seen her.
Her family conducted their own inquiries and search as you would. They'd be thinking things like, has she fallen and got hurt or something of that nature.
News of Ellen's disappearance quickly spreads amongst the local community.
Word gets around very quickly, and there were scores of messages being posted on social media asking people to look for Ellen.
Facebook and Twitter was going off quite a lot. I mean, I'm only a couple of years older than she would be, so there was a lot of people who I knew that actually didn't kind of know her as well. And I can remember when she was missing, everyone being in fear.
Young people going missing, it's something that does cause a great deal of concern in the communities. It tends to trigger a bigger response because they tend to be more vulnerable.
But as the afternoon turns into evening, there's still no sign of Ellen.
By the evening, Ellen's friends and residents in the Orrell area were extremely concerned. It really struck a chord that a young woman of her age had just vanished.
When it became clear that they couldn't locate her, that's when police were contacted, which was around about 7:20 in the evening.
Her dad rang to police saying that his daughter hadn't come home from college, hadn't come back at the expected time, and it was extremely out of character.
Police take over the search for Ellen, and Detective Superintendent Howard Millington is made the senior investigating officer.
There are set what we call golden hour tasks to do. You know, has the person been injured and taken to hospital, so you check with local hospitals, check with family and friends, that kind of thing.
Ellen's phone is turned off, but police speak with her friends and discover that they all received the same message from her earlier in the day.
What we found, it was a Snapchat-type message sent by Ellen, which geolocated to Orrell Water Park. So we knew at a particular point in the afternoon where she was.
With Ellen last known to be in Orrell Water Park just before 2 p.m, police start an intensive search of the area.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
In the peaceful village of Orrell, concern is rising for the welfare of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom after she seems to have vanished into thin air.
It would appear from messages retrieved from her friends' phones that she'd arranged to meet up with some of her friends in a post-exam, you know, letting hair down type of afternoon.
The college student had gone for a walk after finishing her final exam and was due to meet up with friends to celebrate. But she never turned up. and her phone is switched off. Local reporter Andrew Knoll finds himself at the centre of a developing story.
We do report on missing people fairly regularly. It's something that people are very keen to share and engage with. On the Friday evening, I remember a lot of people messaging on those, expressing concern about what was happening with Ellen, asking me for information, asking me what I'd heard about it, what the police had said about it.
As the night draws in, there is still no sign of Ellen. Her worried family desperately cling on for hope.
This was every young parent's nightmare, the anguish of where is she, what's happened to her. You think that your child has, worked hard, got through the exam period, fully entitled to go off and let their hair down on a summer's afternoon. And, the anxiety of sitting exams that all parents and all students feel is as nothing compared to what poor Ellen's parents will then have gone through.
Ellen had been at Orrell Water Park at 2 p.m. So police focused their attention on the surrounding area. Detective Superintendent Howard Millington oversaw the investigation.
So clearly the inquiries did focus on searching the area around Orrell Water Park. Although you've got to focus on where you think that person may be. It's important as a detective to keep an open mind so we don't get what we call confirmation bias creeping in and start to focus on the wrong things.
As night falls, police swarm the village and parklands in a desperate attempt to find Ellen.
On that Friday night, a huge operation swung into action to try and find Ellen.
I remember there was quite a police presence in the area.
There was police everywhere, so everyone knew there was something going on, but obviously didn't know exactly what it was.
After midnight, the police are left with no option but to take to the skies to search the surrounding fields and parkland.
I remember when I being woken up by the police helicopters in the early hours of the morning.
It's got thermal imaging and very high quality resolution cameras to search for people who may be missing and at high risk.
As the helicopter scans the ground below, suddenly something shows up.
The helicopter discovered a heat source. It was in a farmer's field adjacent to Orrell Water Park and some woodland.
The police helicopter, it picked up a heat source of a person that was running away.
Could this be Ellen? Had she become lost or hurt herself? The helicopter crew direct the officers towards the heat source.
The officers came down this path and closed in. At that particular time, there was some kind of standing crop in the field, probably around about 18 inches high.
The search team move into the crop field, and they quickly make a shocking find.
Tragically, the body of Ellen was discovered.
Police seal off the scene, and it's established that the laptop and mobile phone Ellen had with her were missing. Next to her, an abandoned spade is found.
I got the call from the night detective around about 2:45 in the morning. From the way it was described to me, I was immediately concerned that it was a case of homicide.
On the Saturday morning, Greater Manchester Police had launched a murder probe. And the immediate, urgent appeal for information was to be put out there through the press.
Greater Manchester Police are appealing for information after the body of missing student Ellen Higginbottom was found in Orrell Water Park in the early hours of the morning.
It was a huge shock for everyone around here because it's just such a quiet place, you know, and there aren't normally bad people about.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? You know, it just doesn't happen until you wake up one morning and some poor girl's lost her life.
I mean, I've got kids myself, I've got a little girl myself, and I really was, I mean, all the family was, everybody around here was shocked.
It was very scary, you know, I've got grandchildren, and you think that that young girl, what she went through, you know, what she had to deal with in that situation must have been horrendous.
It's quite scary for everyone. You know, there's a lot of people walking dogs around here and just using Orrell Water Park, so the fact it was done in broad daylight in such a severe manner, I think, was what kind of shocked people a lot.
Since the early hours, Detective Superintendent Howard Millington has been at the scene.
Well, clearly, the main community concern is there a potential for another offence? You know, this is a horrific crime. You know, nobody's been yet arrested. What are the police doing about it? Around about 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd actually deployed to the scene. My priority then was making sure that all the evidence that we could preserve at that time had been, and facilitate detailed searches with a view to apprehending the offender as quickly as possible.
With the crime scene secured and forensics searching for anything that could catch the killer, this popular beauty spot is suddenly put under the microscope.
I came down to Orrell Water Park the morning after Ellen Higginbottom's body had been discovered. It was here the police had a line of tape and an officer was standing there. There was no public access beyond this point. I remember the park actually being fairly quiet for a Saturday morning in the middle of summer. Word had obviously got out.
When I came out with the dog in the morning, I saw the police forensics, all the white gear.
There was a sense of alarm and numbness, I think, in the area.
The murder investigation is ramped up, and police launch an appeal to the public.
There wasn't an immediately obvious suspect, and so my media strategy was tailored around that. It was to include an appeal for information, to try and identify any as yet unknown witnesses or intelligence, to generate those kind of lines of inquiry.
Police need to establish who could have possibly wanted to cause harm to Ellen and why. With her phone and laptop missing, could this have been a robbery gone wrong? Or was it somebody closer to home?
I had several working hypotheses. Is this somebody in dispute with Ellen? You know, who'd she been in contact with? Was there anything we didn't know about Ellen that we needed to know? Anybody in conflict with her? Looking at computers belonging to Ellen, her phone, were there any communications with people we didn't know about? Well, the reality is, stranger attacks are extremely rare. The sad fact is that most people who are victims of homicide are actually killed by somebody who's known to them.
Suddenly, Ellen's friends and family are put under scrutiny.
The majority of murder victims are known to their killers.
The body of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom has been found 10 hours after she went missing in the Lancashire village of Orrell. Greater Manchester Police start to look closely into Ellen's life.
In the wake of her body being found, immediately one of the questions is, did she know her killer? In the vast majority of cases, that is the case.
The questions I would be looking for is there anybody who she's been in dispute with or fallen out with? Now, that can be because they're friends or work colleagues or partners, family, anything of that nature. You know, does she have a partner? It transpired she had a boyfriend who'd assisted with the search.
Could any of these individuals be involved? With a list of people drawn up by police, everyone closely connected to Ellen is intensively questioned.
As a senior investigating officer, you know, keeping an open mind and making sure that every angle is covered is important. So we utilised a strategy called Trace, Investigate and Evaluate, where we look for things like alibis and where people were. And some of these people I was able to rule out as being potentially responsible because their alibi and movements and times showed that they couldn't be involved.
Ellen's family, boyfriend and inner circle are ruled out of the investigation completely, which leaves a terrifying prospect.
The reality was that this was a stranger who'd committed this horrific crime.
With a killer on the loose, the concern in the community grows.
I think people were in fear that there's someone kind of walking among us in Orrell that could do something like that.
It affected the community pretty badly because there was lots of lone women that used to walk around the park with either the dogs, prams, stuff like that wouldn't go. They wouldn't actually go near the place.
The pressure is mounting on police to find those responsible.
When it became apparent that this was a stranger, in all likelihood, you know, the responsibility on my shoulders as the SIO, it's so intense. You know, I was in the white heat of the investigation. You know, Greater Manchester Police were resourcing and investigating this as thoroughly as possible to apprehend the very, very dangerous offender.
Post-mortem results arrive, which could offer clues to her attacker.
The cause of Ellen's death was two quite dreadful, very deep wounds, in particular to her neck, either one of which would have been sufficient to kill her.
DS Howard Millington said the severity of it and the ordeal that Ellen had gone through was unimaginable. It was a crime of very unusual severity and brutality.
Forensics also arrive from the scene, and the investigation takes an even more sinister turn.
But this was where Ellen was actually found. A little bit further this way, there was a hole in the hedge. And we proved forensically, once the scientists had been down, that's where the attack took place, because of some of the blood samples and other material there. And it was clear she was dragged through into the field after the attack.
Ellen's clothing had been disturbed in a way that was consistent with deliberate interference with her garments.
Also, she had what looked like faint ligature mark around her wrist. And there was a belt, which was around her feet, ankle area, which we confirmed with Ellen's family didn't belong to Ellen. It was clearly a gent's belt.
The discovery leads police to consider a new theory.
So somewhere in this particular area, in these trees, and that's where the attack took place. And my belief was that this was ultimately a sexually motivated crime.
A speck of blood is picked up on the belt found at the scene, and it's sent off for DNA testing. The marks around Ellen's ankles also appear to suggest the belt was used to drag her from the attack site to the field where her body was found.
They were, in my view, looking to dispose of the body. There was a spade found nearby, so I think their intentions was to make sure she was buried and not found.
Confronted with the latest evidence, police appeal to the community for information, giving out details of Ellen's missing items. The plan works, and they are contacted by a concerned local.
A call was received in relation to a man acting strangely in certain circumstances. Ultimately, that led us to a piece of woodland not far away where there was a fire. And within the fire, the officers discovered a laptop that had been burnt. Now, we did know from the liaison with Ellen's family that she had a Lenovo laptop.
When the police went to the embers of the dying fire, they indeed found some of Ellen's possessions. her laptop and her keys in what police quickly surmised was a not very effective attempt to destroy some evidence and cover traces that they'd been in possession of them.
Following the discovery of Ellen's missing belongings, burnt out in woodland in nearby Billinge, the police make a breakthrough.
An arrest was made. A man was in custody, being questioned on suspicion of murder.
The man in question is a 47-year-old from the Billinge area. Witnesses identified him trying to set fire to items in the woods. Could this be Ellen's killer? He's taken in and questioned by police and makes a startling admission.
When he was spoken to, was identified two other people who were partners and were also involved. And it transpired that these two individuals, along with the male that was arrested near this fire, had taken possession of Ellen's property, disposed of it.
Police, they made 2 further arrests in and around the Orrell area.
The 2 further suspects are arrested and taken into custody. A 30-year-old man and a 31-year-old woman. They are also from the Billinge area. Who are these 3 suspects? And what is their involvement in Ellen's death? As police dig further, they find no forensic evidence linking the trio to the murder scene. But then, police receive DNA results from the belt, which changes the course of the investigation.
A gent's belt that was near Ellen had both Ellen's DNA and also matched that of a man.
It matched a man called Mark Buckley.
Then I made the decision to declare him as a suspect and arrest him on suspicion of murder.
Police! You're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything. It may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something you'll later align in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Would you like to make any response to that? Anything to say?
Pardon?
Anything to say to that?
Can you let me?
Yes, have you got keys on you? Or
Yeah.
the keys?
Yeah.
The keys are there, are they? Right. Okay. Well, we'll secure your property for you. Don't worry about that.
Police now have 4 suspects in custody.
We're going to take you back to residential now for questioning.
But what is the connection between Mark Buckley and the trio who were accused of disposing of Ellen's belongings? Could Ellen's murder have been a group attack? Officers delve into Mark Buckley's background.
Mark Buckley was 52 years old. He had been staying with his mother in a nearby address. He did have previous convictions, but nothing that would have particularly flagged up that he was about to go out and commit this kind of offence.
He'd been arrested over an arson incident in which he'd set fire to a neighbour's car. There were a couple of other minor matters on his police record. A fray was one of them, but absolutely nothing on this sort of scale or severity.
Despite the forensic evidence against him, Mark Buckley denies any involvement with Ellen's murder. But police uncover CCTV evidence, which shows Buckley heading towards Orrell Water Park just after 1 p.m.
We managed to track some of his movements, and what that did show, he goes out in the early afternoon, and it was very warm on that day. He was wearing quite a heavy coat, long trousers, and he had like a green shopping carrier bag. And as he's going out, that looks fairly empty. We then see from the same camera Buckley coming back sometime later. When he comes back, this bag is clearly full. He's no longer wearing his coat, he's just wearing a vest, and he's just wearing shorts.
Despite being confronted with video evidence, Buckley continues to deny any involvement in Ellen's murder. But then the other suspects in custody start to speak. Not only do they say they are friends with Buckley, but they describe how they came to have Ellen's possessions.
Transpired that Mark Buckley had been to the three offenders. He had passed on a rucksack with items including a laptop and keys that he'd stolen from Ellen. He had also sold on her mobile phone to one of them as well.
With the evidence against Buckley mounting up, he finally cracks.
When he was questioned by detectives, Buckley, in the end, confessed fairly quickly to killing Ellen.
Mark Buckley is charged on suspicion of Ellen Higginbottom's murder, while the other three suspects are charged with perverting the course of justice in knowingly disposing of evidence. But what actually happened on that fateful summer night when Ellen was killed? "52-year-old Mark Buckley has been charged with the murder of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom, after he admitted to police that he was the man responsible."
Mark Buckley did admit that he killed her. He said hello and then dragged her off the path. Didn't give any explanation, clearly didn't want to admit any sexual elements.
He was fairly quickly contrite as to the killing itself, but he always maintained that there was no sexual activity or sexual motivation behind his crime.
After Mark Buckley allegedly sold on items stolen from Ellen after the murder took place, attention turns to the other three suspects from Billinge. Two men aged 47 and 30, and a 31-year-old woman.
Three other people were on charges related to assisting the offender or involvement in the crime.
They were charged with perverting the course of justice in that they got rid of evidence and handling the stolen laptop.
3 months after Ellen's murder, Mark Buckley appears at Manchester Crown Court to enter a formal plea. As he arrives in the courtroom, he cuts a subdued figure.
We went to the court, you just see somebody coming up the gantry. Yeah, it looked like he put a lot of weight on. He stared straight at me and my partner, and he walked to the front, and basically we heard what he'd done.
He showed very little reaction to the brief proceedings. He spoke only to confirm his name and address. The defence said that he expressed remorse and regret to his lawyer for what he had done, but could give very little explanation of his actions or motive.
Mark Buckley formally pleads guilty to the murder of Ellen Higginbottom. And when he returns to the court for sentencing, information about his past comes to light.
Mark Buckley grew up round here. Most of our regulars knew him. I knew him personally. He sometimes used to come in the pub.
I have known of him and known where he lived for, like, I'd say, 39 years, since I was about 10, because he used to live with his mum and his grandma next door to my nan.
Mark Buckley was a bit strange, really. He was a bit of a loner. There never seemed to be that much harm in him.
He, in the local area, was basically always a bit of an oddball, a bit of a loner. We'd always get stories about him, always doing something. In the local area, people were wary of him.
Buckley's past criminal convictions are revealed to the courtroom.
I can go back to August 2012. I got married and we was living near where Mark was living, and we come back the next morning to find out that he'd torched his next door neighbour's car.
I remember walking down that day and there was a vehicle, I think it was a Land Rover, that had been fired, and it was him who did it.
I'd heard that he'd had an argument with some family, to which he basically blew the car up with petrol, etc., and there was actually a crater in the floor where he'd done it.
In 2012, Buckley was sentenced to 2.5 years for arson and criminal damage. After serving his time, he came back to the village of Orrell.
When he actually came out of prison and he came in this pub, he was making out, when he walked through the door, like as a celebrity's come, he was still bragging about that and what he was going to do to people over that. He was still the same lad, unhinged.
Feeling disturbed by his return, the local community had come together to raise their concerns with the police.
People was basically scared of him coming in the area.
As a result, police relocate Buckley to nearby Preston. But despite this, the court hears how he still found a way of returning to his childhood village of Orrell.
I honestly believe that he was saying he was coming to see his mother, but not making out that he was staying over here. So the Preston flat what he had was vacated, and then he was coming here, staying with his mother for 3, 4, 5 days sometimes. A lot of people was anxious and scared about that.
Tragically, the community's fear and suspicions around Buckley come into fruition on the morning of the 16th of June, 2017, when Buckley enters Orrell Water Park at 5:30 a.m.
Buckley had been in the park probably from almost first light that day. Early morning dog walkers recall seeing Buckley.
Mark Buckley, police discovered, had been in the area for quite some time. He had been scoping out the area on the Friday.
Basically, Mark was on the prowl round the water park, and different people had come forward saying an individual was preying on young women.
He approached a number of women who were walking alone and then let them go.
Several hours later, Buckley returns home, but decides to revisit the park again at 1 p.m, perhaps more determined to find a victim. By chance, Ellen Higginbottom has just finished her final exam and enters the park at 2 p.m. She had no idea what would be waiting for her.
On that afternoon, he selected his victim as Ellen Higginbottom when she wandered alone into the water park. She was a very petite girl. She stood 5'4". She was very slightly built, and he was able to overpower her very easily.
After the murder, which we believe took place probably around 2:30 in the afternoon, it would seem that he was still in the vicinity of the park. He tried to get rid of what would have been heavily blood-stained clothing.
The court hears from witnesses who saw Buckley in the park that afternoon with scratches across his body.
Eyewitnesses recall him making some excuse that he was rather hot and bothered because he'd had a bit of an episode with the dog, and some of the scratches, which were probably poor Ellen's defensive actions that had caused those, he blamed on getting tangled up with the bushes in his lead and his dog.
2 hours after Ellen's murder, Buckley finally returns home wearing only shorts and a vest, while carrying a bag believed to contain his blood-stained clothing, as well as Ellen's stolen belongings. Buckley then sells the items to his friends, the trio from Billinge, claiming he found them in the park.
It became clear that these people used drugs. It was a chance to make some money, and ultimately some of the money that they received for items that, you know, they'd taken possession of was spent on drugs, and it was as simple as that, really.
And later that night, as news of Ellen's disappearance was spreading through the village, Buckley returns to the scene of the crime.
It would appear that Buckley decided to go back later to try to hide Ellen's body. He'd gone back with a spade, and the police were still at that stage searching for Ellen. His activities in the park registered on a heat-seeking camera that the police were deploying during their search. He was seen effectively by the police in what we believe was an attempt to make a better job at hiding poor Ellen's body in the undergrowth.
The prosecution puts its theory to the court as to what lay behind Buckley's crime.
When we presented the case at the Crown Court, we maintained that there was a sexual element to the crime. Mark Buckley denied and continued to deny throughout that there was any sexual motivation or activity associated with the killing.
But it's revealed to the courtroom that following searches of Buckley's address, police discovered a bag.
That bag was recovered from inside a bin. It was heavily blood-stained inside. And it also, in the bottom of it, was still what I can only describe as a rape kit.
He was found to be in possession of condoms and lubricants and other unsavoury items in a carrier bag he had with him. So we left the court in no doubt that this was sexually linked, although there was no charge of rape or indecent assault, sexual assault or anything of that nature.
And the court also hears further shocking evidence from that fateful afternoon.
A witness actually came forward to say they heard what sounded like a man and a woman having sex within the trees. And unbeknown to that particular witness, I'm confident that that was Buckley assaulting Ellen. I'm confident about that because of the time and particularly the location. The location was subsequently identified as the attack site.
On the 14th of September 2017, the judge imposes his sentence and accepts there was a sexual motivation to the murder. Buckley is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 31 years behind bars.
We went to the court. As he was walking down to the thing, you seen him just basically go and puff down. And I honestly don't think he's got any remorse.
I think the sentence Mark got was really a bit of a disgrace. What he did was absolutely disgusting, and he should never be allowed out in the community again.
After pleading guilty to perverting the course of justice, the 47-year-old man from Billinge is given a suspended 2-year sentence and ordered to do unpaid work. The couple, also from Billinge, are sentenced, with the 30-year-old man receiving 20 months behind bars, while the 31-year-old woman is given a 16-month suspended sentence.
He'd lied to the police, he'd helped get rid of property and handling stolen goods. And, you know, to behave like that, knowing full well what Buckley had actually done, and still get engaged in that, in destroying evidence and handling Ellen's belongings, is actually pretty despicable in my book.
With Mark Buckley now behind bars, the community of Orrell tried to come to terms with what happened on their doorstep.
It did change Orrell. It's not just what he's done to the girl. The people going to the college, all her family, all her friends.
God knows what that family must have gone through. Really, you know what I mean? It's not, you have kids and basically the kids bury you. You don't bury your kids, you know what I mean?
I recall Mike and Kay being relieved, I think, not pleased. I think they were satisfied that Ellen's killer had been brought to justice.
And in the centre of Orrell sits a lasting memory to the popular student who once had her whole life ahead of her.
The community after Ellen Higginbottom's death came together and created a garden. It pays tribute to Ellen, her love of nature and animals, and there is a little library contained within it as well, where people can just leave spare books and can take books as well, which I think it was felt would be fitting to someone who loved her studies and would clearly have probably gone on to university and then a professional career of some kind.
Her mobile phone revealed she'd even sent messages after news of Nicky's murder broke.
Yvonne Kaler was pretending to be as concerned and upset as every other member of Nicky's family. She sent a message to her husband in the United States saying, "Pray for Nicky, as I will."
While piecing together Yvonne's movements in the days leading up to Nicky's murder, further revelations come to light.
She had visited the costume shop where she acquired the wig and the disguise and the false beard the preceding week. So there'd been clearly an element of planning about all of this.
We believe she's planned this murder meticulously, so she's an extreme danger to the public out there.
Police build their evidence against Yvonne Kaler, but at this stage it's purely circumstantial. So the focus turns to questioning Yvonne while in custody.
Yvonne, do you recognise the person in that CCTV?
Look, bow-legged, fat, bow-legged to me.
Even though it could be clear that the person on the CCTV is Yvonne, Yvonne is denying that that is her, and that is not enough on its own to convict somebody of murder.
It was almost like it was a joke. Like she had padded herself up with some sort of padding, and she had a high vis on, a moustache, it looked like she'd brought in a joke shot, a wig and a goatee. And it was the most surreal. I can't to this day even look at it, like, I literally can't believe the way she dressed up and how she thought she was going to get away with that, because you can clearly see that that is her.
When I heard that Yvonne had dressed up to get into the flat, I was just gobsmacked. Never have even thought of anything like that.
Well, I couldn't tell if it was a fake beard.
Do you own a fake beard?
No, I don't own a fake beard.
Do you own a fake wig?
No, I don't own a fake wig.
By denying her presence on the CCTV, Yvonne was trying to achieve the smoke and mirrors that she'd of her plan. She wanted the police to believe that this was a man, and in fact, in her police interview, she tells the police officer that she thought it was a man who was bow-legged. Again, this was just part of her callous plan.
I'm fat, but I'm not bow-legged. It looked like a man to me. I couldn't see his face.
What do you think looked like a man?
Just what they're wearing looked like a dude.
Then there is a breakthrough in the case. Results have come back from the forensic lab, which had been analysing the blood found on the broken chicken pot.
The breaking of the casserole pot at the moment that it was used to strike her had quite clearly cut the hands of the person who was holding it at the time, because on some of those ceramic pieces were found blood, the DNA of which did not match Nikki Collingbourne, but which did match that of Yvonne Kaler.
I knew in my mind, Yvonne has murdered Nikki. I just knew.
Yvonne Kaler was quickly charged with murder.
Well, of course.
Why would you think that's me?
Because to me, it looks like the person's wearing a wig and a beard.
Well, I don't know about a wig, but they look like they had a beard.
We suspect that person has murdered your sister.
Well, it ain't me, because I ain't going to be able to push on that door like that.
Yeah, you said, we believe it's you. You said it's not you.
I know, you can't believe you think it's me.
Having been charged with the murder of Nikki Collingbourne, Yvonne Kaler maintains her innocence, but is remanded in custody until a trial date is set. Nikki's body is released, so she can finally be laid to rest.
Nikki was loved by so many people. At a funeral, there were so many people there that obviously I knew, and so many people had travelled from all over to come to her funeral. They'd all bought pictures of her, like at the nursery with the kids, and they all put it on a big board, and it was lovely.
But the funeral brings more devastating news for the family.
Nikki's mum, Rena, it destroyed her. She was like, she died, did it like a day before the funeral. She didn't even get to bury it or
With overwhelming evidence stacking against her, Yvonne Kaler has been charged with the murder of Nikki Collingbourne. Having pleaded not guilty, Kaler's trial begins at Luton Crown Court.
The main issue in the case was the identity of the person who had been captured on the CCTV forcing their way in. Because Yvonne Kaler's defence to the charge of murder was a perfectly simple one. It wasn't me and I was elsewhere at the time.
As the case opens, Nikki's family take to the stand.
I think I was one of the first people to give evidence, so I couldn't actually go and sit in the gallery until I'd given my evidence. I just remember when I did go in, that obviously the very first person I did see was Yvonne. And she was just smirking, trying to make me feel uncomfortable.
And they reveal a major fallout between Nikki and her half-sister Yvonne when the latter came to the UK to visit family for a few months.
Yvonne had been at Nikki's for a few months. They'd had a few bad days, a couple of little rows, and either Yvonne or Nikki would end up in my mum's house, which is where we resided at the time. And, you know, we could kind of see the tension, you know, getting a bit more.
So I think they lived together for a very short length of time, like 5 months. But in that 5 months, a lot happened. Like, a lot happened. Yvonne was literally trying to manipulate Nikki into doing everything for her. It was like she was using Nikki, basically. She was just using her.
So when Nikki told us that she was going to evict Yvonne, we were ecstatic, really, because Nikki had been in a bit of a state for a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer.
Tension arose between them whilst they were living in the flat, and Nikki Collingbourne asked her to leave. On the day of her departure, there was unpleasantness between them, and Yvonne Kaler made a complaint to the police that Nikki Collingbourne had assaulted her. And the police came to the flat and they arrested Nikki Collingbourne, and she was taken to a local police station. Having interviewed her, it wasn't long before I think they realised that there wasn't any substance to the complaint, and she was released from custody, allowed to go home, and in fact nothing further was ever done in respect of that complaint.
But whilst Nikki was busy explaining herself to local police, it seems Yvonne was taking her revenge for being evicted.
While Nikki was being questioned, Yvonne paid a locksmith to break in, basically. She proved that she'd lived there because obviously she had paperwork to say that that was her address, but obviously she wasn't on the tenancy. And so the locksmith, like, he had no idea, because she was very manipulative. She just pulls the wool out over everyone's eyes.
Whilst Nikki was in custody with the police, Yvonne stole loads of stuff.
Once inside Nikki's flat, it seemed Yvonne stole some of her half-sister's belongings, something Nikki discovered when she arrived home.
Well, she immediately reported what had taken place to the police, that her sister had let herself in to what was Nikki's home without permission, and Yvonne Kaler was arrested as a result of that complaint.
But Yvonne seemed determined to wheedle her way out of trouble.
Yvonne Kaler was now in big trouble. She was facing a burglary charge and a trial at the Crown Court. She approached Nikki's ill, elderly mother in an attempt to persuade her to say that the property that she'd taken belonged to her.
She was subsequently charged with offences of burglary and doing acts tending and intended to pervert the course of justice, and those proceedings, that case was due to be tried at the Crown Court at Cambridge.
While awaiting her day in court for burglary, Yvonne was released on bail on the condition she didn't contact Nikki.
She breached those conditions. She would phone her up, try and make contact with her, and did so in such a way as to cause considerable alarm to Nikki.
Nikki was certainly living in fear of Yvonne due to the burglary and perverting the course of justice.
I think she was just hoping that Yvonne would get on a plane and go back to America and just leave her in peace, because wherever she went, she was always looking over her shoulder, and yeah, it wasn't very nice for her to see her like that. She'd gone completely within herself. She's not bubbly anymore.
Yvonne's trial for burglary and perverting the course of justice was listed for May 23rd. Her half-sister Nikki was due to give evidence against her, something which police believe made Yvonne carry out her deadly plan.
Yvonne Kaler is a very controlling and manipulative person. She likes to be in control. However, once she's charged with burglary and perverting the course of justice, the court process is out of her control. So to try and wrestle that control back, she's been very, very callous in planning and executing the murder of her stepsister.
The court hears how on the day she was due to stand trial for burglary, Yvonne donned her disguise and entered the flat where Nikki lived, approaching her door.
Then this shocking scene of the door being opened, and what we surmised from the way that she was dressed and the towel and the half-full bath is that Nikki had been in the bathroom with a towel wrapped round her, with just her underwear on. She was preparing to have a morning bath. She heard the doorbell go. She opened the door, and as she recognised it was her sister, she would have been really frightened and shocked at the realisation of seeing that, although it was her sister was disguised in this bizarre way, and I think she would immediately have known that she was in really serious danger. And there was a struggle at the door. And as you watched it, there were that awful couple of seconds where it looked as though she was just about to get the door shut, before finally it was forced open and Yvonne Kaler went in, and then the door shut behind her. And then 2 hours of nothing.
Once inside the flat, the prosecution claims Yvonne and Nikki argued in the kitchen, and as Nikki turned to walk away, Yvonne attacked her.
The chicken dish would have been picked up by two hands and used with considerable force, and Nikki would have been walking away from that. Certainly was enough to render her unconscious.
Then Yvonne panicked and tried to stage the scene.
There's been an attempt made to make this look like a suicide. So there was injuries to Nikki's wrist to make it look like she'd self-harmed. There was also a big tidy-up of the flat, and including the staging of placing a dustpan brush in Nikki's left hand.
Having tried to make it look as though Nikki had cut herself on the broken pot and bled to death while trying to clear it up, Yvonne is once again caught on CCTV leaving the flat.
She was carrying some plastic bags that she hadn't had with her when she arrived, so she clearly had some property in the bags. One of the things which we consider she did when she left, and which was in the bag, were some of the remnants from the casserole pot that had been used. Because one of the things the police did was they put it all back together again. It was like a 3D jigsaw. But what it demonstrated once they'd done it was that there were a number of the pieces missing. We surmised that she'd realised that there was her blood on the broken pieces, and she had taken those which she could find with bloodstains on them in the plastic carrier bag. But unfortunately for her, unfortunately for us, she left a couple behind.
When Yvonne Kaler was shown the CCTV footage, her reaction was one of denial.
Yvonne, do you recognise the person in that CCTV?
Look, bow-legged, fat, bow-legged to me. I'm fat, but I'm not bow-legged. Looked like a man to me. I couldn't see his face.
As the trial progresses, Yvonne continues to deny her involvement. Then the prosecution calls a new witness.
Actually, the worst moment thinking about it through the trial was when they brought prisoner to give evidence against Yvonne.
We found out that there was a prisoner that Yvonne had spent some time with while she was on remand. She was going to be released quite soon.
She decided to draw a map of my flat and try and bribe a prisoner that was being released to set fire to my flat, knowing that my daughter was living here at the time with my 2 grandchildren.
She had this idea that if she gave her some of her DNA, I think it was blood, on a cotton bud or something, that she could leave the evidence there and set fire to it and say, well, someone's trying to frame me, because how would my blood be at a scene when I'm in prison? So someone's obviously framed me for the murder of Nikki.
But Yvonne's bizarre plan to try to suggest she had been set up for the murder didn't sway the jury. With all the facts presented to them, including the CCTV footage and the DNA evidence, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
So at one point in the trial, I honestly thought it was going to go the other way. It was like almost like her defence was like making it kind of out like she couldn't have possibly done this, and like honestly, we honestly thought at one point maybe she's going to get away with this. Honestly, it's a really scary feeling. Even though we knew all the evidence was there, it's convincing that jury that she did that.
On December the 19th, 2016, Yvonne Kaler is found guilty of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years.
Yvonne Kaler could have accepted the burglary charges or gone to trial on the burglary charges and let the jury decide. But she decided not to. She hatched a plan, cold, calculated, and she killed Nikki Collingbourne rather than face a trial for burglary.
When the guilty verdict was read out, I think there was the biggest sigh of relief to know that she was going to be locked up and that we would just never have to have anything to do with her ever again, and that we could then tell our children that this bad person is now in prison and she can't touch any of us anymore.
After Nikki passed away, people would like come up to me and say how sorry they were, and they'd always have a memory of her helping them in some way. Like, she would literally go out of her way to help people. She loved to make people happy, and that's what Nikki lived for, because seeing other people happy made her happy. Like, I can't explain. She was just such a gentle soul.
Experience the power of science to crack a crime. Forensics Catching the Killer is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Case on a lay-by just near the road.
People came across a suitcase and opened it, and inside was the remains of a person.
Local people found it extraordinary that such an incident could happen here.
For a murder to happen, not only a murder, but a murder on this scale, it was absolutely shocking for the community.
We had knowledge that he had over £270,000 worth of debt, and he was struggling to pay off those debts.
There was blood absolutely everywhere in that room, on the sofa, on the walls and on the ceiling.
Through extreme measures, he used the alternative of planning the murder of his friend.
Tintwistle is an idyllic village nestled on the edge of the Peak District.
Tintwistle is a typical Peak District village. It's got a mixture of beautiful stone cottages. It's on the banks of the Longdendale Valley, and behind it are the Tintwistle Moors, known as the Nar and the Lower Moor. And it has stunning views over the Longdendale Valley and the 5 reservoirs.
A very parochial village, where people can leave your back door open, no problems.
In Tintwistle, everyone knows each other. It's a very, neighbourly feel. It's a very close-knit community.
We've got a lot of people who have a lot of very good neighbours, and I think everybody supports each other.
In terms of crime rates in Tintwistle, it's fairly, non-existent.
But all this is about to change when the peace is shattered early one morning.
On the 10th of October, there was a 999 call received from dog walkers that had found a suitcase on a lay-by just near the road.
The location was on a main road that went between Manchester and Sheffield, and it dipped down a little bit into Derbyshire. It was a car park off the main road, but it was an area that was quite popular for walkers.
As you come into Tintwistle from the east, you go along what's called the Woodhead Pass, and this particular suitcase was dumped just over the wall as you go into the village beside the first reservoir.
As I remember, it's like this people passing by this lay-by and came across a suitcase and opened it, and inside the suitcase was the remains of a person.
Police are immediately dispatched to the area.
There's quite a long drive, really, from the point where I got the call to the point where I arrived at the scene. Just to give you some idea around the geography, when I first got the call, I was in Derby, which is here. The deposition site was all the way to the north of the county, to the north of Derbyshire, and as you can see, it's right at the very tip of the county.
Upon arrival, they are met with a gruesome sight.
It looks like the suitcase has been set on fire, and inside that suitcase we have a body of a man whose head has been removed, whose arms have been removed, and whose feet have been removed.
It was a Samsonite suitcase that was in an extremely charred state. But then it became apparent, and we had a human torso that had been extremely cruelly dismembered and burnt.
As a crime, this is really, really vicious. For somebody to remove all the limbs of a body, never mind commit the murder itself.
Derbyshire Constabulary launch a murder investigation, and news of the horrific find soon spreads around the village.
Oh, like chicken pox. Everybody talks about it, we all know about it. You go in the local shops. Have you heard?
In Tintwistle, it's a really neighbourly community. Everyone knows each other. If there's gossip, someone down the road will know about it in 10 minutes or so. Considering the crime rate was fairly non-existent for a murder to happen, not only a murder, but a murder on this scale, it was completely shocking for the community.
I think local people found it extraordinary that such an incident could happen here. I think, like all major crimes that happen in what everybody would regard as somewhere quiet and peace-loving, it adds to people's fear that something else could happen, or something else could happen as a result of it.
Police immediately cordon off the crime scene.
The big issue you've got here is you're out in the open. So there's two things. There's the weather, so rain can come and wash away your evidence. But secondly, you've got the issue of privacy. This is a really busy road. There's lots of traffic coming through, and you need to protect the privacy of that individual. That's really important.
Really what you want to do is secure and preserve as much evidence as you can. So there would have been things like identifying where the scene is, making sure that it was cordoned off, that there was enough police officers to ensure that nobody stumbled across the scene.
Beyond the scene, you might be looking at further searches. Has anything discarded, any clothing, any weapons, etc. So this particular point is very important from a forensic point of view. So you would want to be able to get some of your experts down, you want your crime scene manager, you'd really want your pathologist to be coming down to having a look at the scene, just so they have a full understanding of what's here, so that they can do a better job down the line.
And what I would do there is I'd have a discussion with the crime scene manager about the best way of removing the body to a hospital, but also making sure that we didn't lose any evidence while we were in that process, because the evidence that you might lose might be the only evidence that you get that helps you with the case.
Once you start moving a body, then the issue there is a potential loss of evidence, so there'll be some sampling requirements there and then, even in the circumstances where a body's been burnt. For example, there may well be fibres that have been transferred from the offender to the body, or alternatively to the suitcase that haven't been damaged. It's really important to pick those up at that point.
The body is removed, and police focus on one thing.
But I think when you look at the wider picture around this is somebody's life. This is that they've lost, and you know what I really want to do is find out who the family is, who are the relatives and the friends of this individual, and they need informing at the earliest opportunity.
This was going to be a huge challenge for the police now, because there's absolutely nothing to go by. They've just found a torso. There's nothing to identify the person, no fingerprints.
When you're looking at the difficulty presented by not being able to make an identification, the first things that we considered were things like the police database, and then we started looking at people who were missing, but because we had quite a wide geographical area, it was looking at people who were perhaps missing from West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Greater Manchester, as well as Derbyshire. But it's an arterial route, could have been from anywhere.
With very little to go on, the pressure is on for the police to try to identify the body.
You head towards the things that you are quite confident that will bring about an identification. But then when the obvious start to go, then it progressively becomes more and more difficult. And you start considering any other locations or any other information that you may get that you think will help you identify who this person was. So it made it a really difficult inquiry where we were having to be very, very precise around the investigative tactics that we used to try and find out who were the people who were involved.
Whilst the police await lab results from the pathologist's examination of the body, their attention turns to other lines of inquiry.
So the first point of call for the police now would have been to conduct local inquiries, asking people if they'd seen anything, if they'd heard anything.
When these things initially happen, all sorts of stories start to abound.
But the question on everybody's lips is, who is the victim?
Foremost in my mind was, there is a family somewhere whose loved one has been murdered, and they don't know about it.
In the picturesque Peak District, police have launched a murder investigation after an unidentified body was discovered in a suitcase which had been set alight.
So the condition of the body, when we found it, the head had been removed, both hands had been removed, and the feet had been removed. There were two things that I sort of realised quite quickly. One, that was a deposition site. That wasn't where the murder had taken place. That was where the body had been placed afterwards. And the second thing was, and it was around whether the victim and the offender knew each other. And I took the view that why would one take the steps to hide somebody's identity if they didn't know each other? So I sort of realised in my own mind that if I worked out who the victim was, I would be able to work out who the offender was. And if I worked out who the offender was, I'd be able to work out who the victim was.
Unable to identify their victim, police await the results of the post-mortem.
It's slightly unusual. There was no cause of death. So this tells us that there was no marks or scars or any wounds on the body parts that we had recovered, and clearly the victim's head had been removed. When we looked at the information that we did have from the post-mortem, this was a light-skinned male, and that's all that we were able really to glean from that. From the post-mortem, there were no marks, scars, tattoos or anything that would have assisted us making an identification.
Police trawl the missing persons database for any clues as to who their victim could be.
At the time, there was a lot of missing persons cases, so this could have been absolutely anybody.
There's quite a lot of missing people reported every single day in Derbyshire. And it was a case of refreshing those every single day, because the person may not be reported on day 1 or day 2 or day 3, but every single day going through the detail of who those individuals were and seeing if we could make a connection between the body that we got and that person who was missing.
With little to go on, Derbyshire Constabulary hold a press conference.
The purpose of today's press conference is to ask for the public's help to identify the victim. We are working with other forces to ascertain whether our victim may have been reported missing in a neighbouring county, but we recognise that he might not have been reported missing at all. We are therefore asking members of the public to come forward if they have not seen a neighbour or a friend or a colleague, or indeed any members of their family recently. A special call centre has been set up to take calls from across the UK, and we are urging people to provide information in relation to this murder investigation.
Information soon starts to filter into the police.
It became apparent that a number of dog walkers had seen the suitcase but hadn't realised exactly what was inside.
So in order to better understand the time frame that we're looking at and understand when the body may have been put in the car park, we did substantial inquiries with people who'd been on the road. We were asking for people who'd got dash cam footage or people that had driven past, and there were a few positive responses out of that, which were able to tell us that the fire had been set late the night before.
With 3 different drivers claiming to have seen a fire around 11:30 p.m. on the 9th of October, officers on the ground can now focus on who was in the area around that time, in a bid to identify the potential killer.
So that was really useful from the initial investigation point of view to be able to really narrow those timelines so you could concentrate on that time period and work out from there what the offender had done, where he'd been, where he'd likely to travel to and from.
Police now ramp up their inquiries.
There was a bolt out of the blue, and we got a conversation. We got a phone call in from South Yorkshire to inform us that there was actually an ANPR camera on the A628. So the phone call that we got on that day was, do you know you've got an ANPR camera on the 628? And no, we didn't, but thanks very much for telling us. That's really great.
Police immediately trawl through the automatic number plate recognition cameras to establish which vehicles had passed through the area on the night in question.
The police followed ANPR camera footage and located a Mercedes vehicle that triggered the camera just after 11 o'clock on Sunday the 9th, the evening before, and then didn't actually make it all the way across Woodhead Pass Road and to trigger the other ANPR camera at the other end.
It was the only vehicle that passed in the window of opportunity. So every other vehicle only went in one direction, either towards Manchester or towards Yorkshire.
All the vehicles, over 200 that had travelled along that road within the time period, down to one that had turned around and returned back to the Manchester area.
That was a strong indication that that vehicle was the one that deposited the body here on the night of the 9th.
After 10 days of round-the-clock investigations, and still having no clue as to the identity of their victim or suspect, this discovery is key.
The Mercedes triggered the camera on the evening before between 23:09 and 23:26. So straight away that was something I was very interested in, and we started to make some inquiries as to who might be the owner and what might be the significance of that vehicle.
This was absolutely key in the investigation. After 10 days of not finding anything, they needed to find out who this silver Mercedes belonged to.
As it happened, the vehicle didn't have any insurance, and so there was a reason to go and stop it and speak to the driver and have a look at the vehicle.
After further investigation, police discover that the vehicle is registered to someone living in Manchester.
So the owner of the vehicle was somebody called Ming Jiang.
Once the vehicle had been identified, it was registered to Ming Jiang, and therefore this triggered for the police to monitor him, make inquiries as to where he lived, inquiries of where he went.
There was so much pressure on the police. At this point in the investigation, it was very time sensitive. After 10 days, they really needed to find this person. At this point, the person who committed the crime could have run away, they could have covered up, or they could have very much so committed again.
Initial inquiries reveal Ming Jiang lives in Manchester, so Derbyshire Constabulary enlist the help of their colleagues over there.
When Greater Manchester Police assisted us, they were able to locate the vehicle, and because it was driven without any insurance, we were able to seize it. And when we seized the vehicle, we were then able to forensically examine it. And what I was looking for in that forensic examination was to find any evidence that might link to the body that we've got and the scene that we'd preserved some days before.
The police found a speck of blood in the rear that was the size of a 10p coin.
This was a really, really big moment in the investigation. What I would be looking to find out there is a blood spot in the boot of the vehicle the same as the blood that we found at the scene. So the DNA was sent away for comparison. It was the longest 24 hours I can imagine. Eventually it came back, and it came back with the news that we were really hoping for, and that was that the blood in the boot matched the DNA of the blood at the scene.
The blood match in the boot of the car puts Ming Jiang at the forefront of the investigation.
I felt this was the first time we were getting a breakthrough and first time we were getting an indication as to what may have taken place here. So as soon as we got the positive information about the DNA hit, it was a case of let's get this person arrested at the earliest opportunity.
So Ming Jiang was arrested on the 20th of October. They'd attended a casino in Manchester where they believed he was, and he was arrested at that location.
Now that the police have Ming Jiang in custody for questioning, time is of the essence to find evidence linking him to the murder.
What is also part of the inquiry is to start doing an evidential search around him to understand where he lived, what his movements were, and whether there was any other evidence that we'd be able to glean from his home address.
The police searched the home address and they found bloodstains all over the carpet. There was blood dispersion across all of the walls. They had been painted over and quite a shoddy clean-up had taken place. It was an extensive clean-up, but there was still blood throughout the flat and in the bathroom.
There was traces of blood absolutely everywhere that weren't immediately apparent to the eye, but there were things like the blood had seeped through the laminate flooring. There was blood that was soaked into the cushions on the sofa. There was blood on the walls and on the ceiling.
So the scene was a really rich source of evidence for us. The main evidence we got were 2 finger marks in blood. So we got one under a table, and the evidence you're really looking for there is the offender's fingerprint in the victim's blood. And getting that in 2 places was very, very critical evidence.
At this point, it's absolutely safe for the police to say that the murder took place in this apartment.
Ten days into the investigation of the body in the suitcase found in a Derbyshire village, police have discovered a car linked to the murder and have made an arrest.
A forensics team investigated the car. They swabbed the blood. This matched the torso that was found in the suitcase. So at this point, the police were then able to arrest Mr. Ming Jiang.
Forensic tests reveal the blood on the torso in the suitcase is a match for the blood in Jiang's flat in Manchester, making Ming Jiang their #1 suspect.
So the investigation moved over to Manchester because it became clear from the Derbyshire point of view that the offence had actually taken place in Manchester. As a result of their inquiries, that took them to the flat at Falconwood Way in Beswick. And as a result of what they found there, they felt very strongly that that was actually the place of the murder. And so as a result of that, that would then become a Manchester investigation.
But police are no closer to identifying their victim.
So as the inquiry goes on, the stress and the pressure builds. As a senior investigating officer, it's a privilege to do that role. But you do take the responsibility of having to investigate the death of somebody, and you owe that responsibility to the family of the victim. So I was really concerned about finding out who that was and getting that information to them at the earliest opportunity.
However, searches of their suspect and his car have led to a discovery.
When we did the evidential search of the Mercedes vehicle, we found some banking documents of another person called Yang Lu.
He had certain possessions on his person. At the time, he had his passport, he had his bank cards.
And that led us to an address in Salford at Media City. And there were some lines of inquiry that we needed to conduct at that address and find out what the relationship was with this person and how they fitted into the inquiry.
Police immediately sent officers to Yang Lu's address.
There was no answer, he was nowhere to be seen by anybody. So I made the decision that we were going to force entry into that apartment and find out really who this person was. So we forced entry into the address at Media City. Nothing particularly remarkable about the address, but what it did allow us to do was take some items from there which we knew the owner of that apartment would have left their DNA on. So very quickly we were able to send that away for analysis.
Finally, there is a breakthrough. Results come back matching Yang Lu's DNA to the torso, as well as the blood found in Ming Jiang's flat and car. Almost 2 weeks after the discovery, police have the name of their victim.
So what we did find out was that Yang Lu was a 27-year-old male, originally from China.
Yang Lu came to the UK in 2000 to study, where he went to the University of Leeds. His family actually worked really, really hard to save money so that he could study in the UK and achieve his goals and his dreams.
He finished his master's degree, and after that he stayed here and become a shares and stock trader.
He'd not brought any of his family with him over here, so if you look at the reasons why he may not have been reported missing, his family simply didn't know that he wasn't where he should have been.
Police now have the harrowing task of informing their victim's family.
This was a really difficult case from a family point of view. Under normal circumstances, we'd want to inform the family in person. And in the end, we actually had to make the call to the family in order to inform them. That's something that we wouldn't normally do under any circumstances, but unfortunately with the distance involved, we had no other option. I arranged for contact through Interpol with the Chinese authorities in order to let the family know. In the meantime, we allocated family liaison officers in order that we could make the process as smooth as possible.
Yang's family were absolutely devastated when they found out, their only son had been murdered. Not only murdered, but in such a vicious way.
And then they arrived in the UK in the second week of November.
Yang was very close to his family. They spoke on the phone near enough every single day. He actually vowed to go back to China and look after his family if one of them was to fall ill. And I think that just shows the tight-knit relationship they have, because he'd built himself this fantastic life in the UK and he was really willing to give that up to go back and look after his family.
When the family was here, then I helped them in different ways because they can't speak English. So most of the time that if they have something do not understand about the police procedure, and I help to explain them.
They were completely grief-stricken. They had lost their only son, who had come to the United Kingdom to study at university. He was a very clever young academic man and a very bright young man, and they were deprived of their son.
With time running out to hold their suspect in custody, police need to work fast to build enough evidence to charge him.
Ming Jiang is a danger to the public, and we would really want to be in a position where he'd be charged at that point. The secondary issue is he's a big flight risk. We'd be worried about him kind of moving back to China or elsewhere.
We had to prove that he was the person that had committed that murder. We knew he was involved and could prove that to the extent, and we then had to build a case.
There's no doubt that Ming Jiang tried to cover his tracks quite extensively, but the problem is there was just too much evidence. The evidence there, in particular, was extremely strong. It's almost the best evidence you can find at a scene, which was Yang Lu's blood and Ming Jiang's fingerprint.
Police now believe Ming Jiang murdered Yang Lu in his flat, dismembered his body, and dumped his torso in a suitcase before setting light to it. But they need to work out the link between the pair and establish when the murder happened, so trawl CCTV footage in the days leading up to the discovery of the suitcase.
CCTV footage revealed a man getting off the tram in Manchester. He crossed the road to meet another man and they went in the direction of a flat in Beswick.
That tram stop was the closest one to where Ming Jiang's home address was.
The male he met up with perfectly fit the description of Ming Jiang. And in addition to that, we had telephone evidence that showed the two phones of Ming Jiang and Yang Lu came together. And interestingly, from that point onwards, the phones always remained together. And that was the very last time that Yang Lu was seen.
With the evidence building, police make a decision.
So I authorised one charge of murder.
Ming Jiang denies any involvement in the murder, so the police and prosecution need to build a case for trial and establish a motive, meaning they have to delve deeper into the lives of the two men.
Yang Lu was definitely a responsible young man. He invested in stocks and shares and he knew how to make money. He was very clever in that sense. He'd built himself this brand new life in the UK. He really had a bright future ahead of him. Yang really enjoyed gambling. He was a very big gambler. He'd go to casinos quite often. He always gambled within his means, though. He was never irresponsible in that respect. Even though he had the money to gamble, he never went above and beyond.
So Ming Jiang was in a very different situation to Yang Lu. Ming Jiang was originally from China. He moved over to the UK. He lived in the Beswick area in North Manchester. He rented that flat. At the time of the murder, he really was in serious debt problems. He'd spent quite a long time at casinos. He was a regular gambler. In fact, so much so that he had VIP status.
We believe that they met in a casino when they shared the same interest to gamble. They met in a Manchester casino.
But Yang Lu could never have imagined that their relationship could be so deadly.
Ming Jiang was very well known in the casino community. In some casinos, he had quite specialised status due to the large amounts of money that he was gambling. Yet in other casinos, he had markers on him due to his erratic and volatile behaviour. It was my understanding that he was a great fun guy to be around when he was winning, but it was a very, very different case when he was losing.
He lost a huge amount of money, and as far as we know, is sort of a £200,000 debt, and he's been chasing by the debtor, the creditor within the community.
It was the Crown's case that Ming Jiang had accrued extensive debts. We had knowledge that he had historically acquired over £270,000 worth of debt within 2 casinos. He was struggling to pay off those debts. We knew that he had pawned some wristwatches for over £15,000 to try and keep the debtors at bay.
Getting more and more desperate to pay off his debts, it appears Ming Jiang hatched an evil plan.
Ming Jiang was in huge amounts of debt. He had no income or wherewithal with which to repay that debt, and the only way he believed he could do that was either through his addiction of gambling and waiting for the big win, or through extreme measures. He used the alternative of planning planning the murder of his friend.
When the police found Ming Jiang, he was actually in possession of Mr. Yang Lu's passport and his bank cards. So at this point, it's safe to assume that he was trying to assume his identity.
So Ming Jiang had taken Yang Lu's life and then he took his identity. He basically used all his personal information in order to extract money through his bank cards. He even tried to sell his flat, and he was making good progress on that at the point at which he'd been arrested. There was nothing that he wouldn't do in order to extract as much money and value out of Yang Lu.
In Manchester, Ming Jiang's trial for the murder of Yang Lu begins.
So the trial was conducted in April of 2017. Shortly prior to the trial hearing, we did meet with the victims' parents, and we had to reassure them that we would do our utmost to be able to obtain justice for their son.
The court hears how Ming Jiang had a checkered history.
Ming Jiang was a Hong Kong national. Before he came to the UK, he was working as cabin crew for a German airline, where he was actually convicted for credit card fraud.
The police found that he had convictions in Germany for shoplifting, convictions for identity fraud and forgery of documents in Switzerland. He had convictions for credit card fraud in Scotland. So as a result of that, as the reviewing lawyer, it was my job then to write international letters of request. I had to make formal requests to Germany and Switzerland to obtain evidence of those convictions, which we then subsequently at the trial hearing submitted as evidence of bad character.
The prosecution believes Ming Jiang was planning to use his experience of identity fraud to build a new life for himself.
It appeared quite clearly that Ming Jiang understood his way around the financial system, and the kind of things that he did and the way that he adopted the identity, for example, by using Yang Lu's phone to contact banks, etc. That showed quite a little bit of knowledge of how to basically defraud and use identity theft to his advantage.
This was premeditated, it was planned. He had devised a plan as to how he was going to assume his victim's identity and obtain all of his assets and walk away. He was probably going to walk away from his debts, take what money he could get from his victim and return to China. I believe that would have been his plan.
The motive behind the murder was quite clearly agreed. It was obvious that Ming Jiang understood that Yang Lu had a lot of money. He lived in a nice area of Manchester. He owned his own flat. He dabbled in stocks and shares. And the concept that they'd had together, we believe that there would have been some understanding from Ming Jiang's point of view that Yang Lu was pretty wealthy.
During the trial, Ming Jiang's story changes several times.
Ming Jiang showed no remorse whatsoever throughout the whole process. He came out with bizarre and incredulous accounts, changing the overall story on a number of occasions. Initially, he claimed that Yang Lu was an escort and that they were in a relationship. There was absolutely no evidence to support that.
So he wasn't consistent in his account that he was providing to the police. He did pursue that through to the trial hearing and maintained that it was a different Chinese male called Mr. Wong who had committed the act of murder, and he tried to distance himself by using this fictional character.
He later on claimed that there was a kind of third-party gangster-type individual who was involved that Yang Lu owed money to. Again, from an investigation point of view, we were able to show that that simply wasn't the case.
Ming Jiang fabricated Mr. Wong, and he gave the phone number to the police. However, when the police checked the record of the phone, and it's find out that the phone number is only created a date before they believed Liu Yang died.
So all the explanations that Ming Jiang provided were easily discounted and showed that he was just making things up as he went along.
The jury is shown CCTV from the night police believe Yang Lu was murdered, in a bid to prove that Ming Jiang was the last to see him.
The evidence we used, we had a digital sequence of events that displayed all of the CCTV footage and the appropriate stills. So we had the stills showing that Ming Jiang was friends with the victim and that they had attended the casino together on the 3rd of October. And then subsequently, Ming Jiang had clearly lured him to his flat on the 5th of October, and we had a still digital photo of Yang Lu leaving the Metrolink tram stop at Velo Park, which was the closest one to Ming Jiang's home address.
From a CCTV point of view, that was the last point at which Yang Lu had been seen, so that was on the 5th of October.
So his movements shortly after the time that we believe that he had killed Yang Lu, he used the bank cards that he'd acquired. He used them at B&Q to purchase cleaning products, paint with which to paint the flat. He went to the petrol station on numerous occasions, and he was seen to be filling one, if not two, containers of petrol, which we then subsequently believe that he used to set the body on fire.
Having killed his supposed friend and made attempts to clean the evidence, it appears Ming Jiang goes back to doing what he loves best.
In the early hours of the 6th of October, Ming Jiang spent 30 minutes at the casino. He also spent time at the casino after the deposition. So in the early hours of the 10th of October, he spent around 4 hours, and if you can imagine, he'd literally just taken the torso of the body, he's dumped it up in Tinswhistle, and then he set it on fire, returned back to his flat, and the first thing he does is head to the casino to spend Yang Lu's money and gamble.
His actions aren't the actions of what you would expect a normal person to do, and it's a terrible thing to murder somebody, but then to murder somebody and dismember the body and then dump it and set on fire, it's just an incredibly callous act, and it probably speaks a lot about his character.
After hearing the evidence, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
So the jury in this case sat for 4 weeks, and under normal circumstances, you generally expect around about a day's deliberation per week. So under normal circumstances, it would take 4 days to come to a decision. But in this case, it only took them 4 hours, and that shows you really how overwhelming the evidence was.
After weeks of evidence is a very short period of time, and I believe would demonstrate that they were absolutely sure in a very short space of time that Ming Jiang was guilty of this offence.
At the point that they gave their verdict, Ming Jiang was completely emotionless. He showed nothing at all. At that point, he went back into custody, and sentencing took place a week later. The judge actually sentenced him in his absence because he refused to come to court.
The presiding judge made a point of stating that the starting point for a sentence would be 30 years, due to it being solely the sole purpose being for gain, and in this case, for money.
Thế nào chị búp bê có khi chúng tôi thật đấy. Em bảo là tại sao phải đặt bút thẳng được mà. Ừ nhỉ. Ừ nhỉ. Cũng được. Chị có tí sẽ cho mình túi được.
Tao đạp mày ra ngoài kia ngủ đấy.
Chị có tin đuổi mẹ đây còn không?
Ừ.
Minh Khai ở đâu? Xa lắm, hình như Minh Khai ở Hai Bà Trưng thì phải.
Mình sẽ tô cả phần chân của chú khỉ này cũng có màu nâu nha.
Thì em đi chơi với Di Khánh nhé.
Đi luôn đi được không?
Hôm nay thì không được đâu tại vì vừa lắc đấy rồi.
Bảo giờ đi xem phim đi.
Rồi, phim gì?
Tao không biết.
Rồi thì có cái phim gì mà xem. Thôi Di Khánh thì chạy đi mà.
Mẹ nó mà để cho nó đi làm á?
Chạy đi làm, mẹ nó phải bị tin luôn.
Nhưng mà sao lại để cho nó đi chạy bi?
Thì sao?
Thế cơ.
Hấp à? Chẳng phải đi làm hết. Mẹ nó không chiều nó kiểu ấy đâu. Thì nó kể, lần trước nó kể thì mẹ nó tin với cái hiểu nó lắm. Kiểu hay ủng hộ nó làm tất cả mọi việc ấy.
Suốt ngày lên trường mà.
Ủng hộ ra.
Mẹ nó kiểu gặp ai cũng nhận con dâu hết, tao mệt lắm.
Chị á? Em chưa gặp mẹ nó, ý là chưa?
Mình đã sử dụng xong màu nâu để tô phần da của chú khỉ này rồi. Mình sẽ tô luôn cả phần cánh cây cũng như là phần đuôi của chú khỉ này nha.
Em bảo là sao nó cứ kêu là gần hơn được lao. Ý là nhà em hay nhà nó ấy?
Ừ.